The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 121. A little bit of tact. Since all the services around had sizable crowds and long queues, Ragnar instead decided to walk around the inn and observe everything for himself. He investigated the mystery trial as well, but it could only accommodate one person at a time and was already in use. He saw some people sitting and eating in the garden. Some of them were eating spirit food, a huge surprise for earthlings but nothing special for Ragnar. He walked to the meditation room as well as the recovery room and saw firsthand their capabilities. Although he could not be sure about the effectiveness of the meditation room, judging from the level of all the other services he could garner a guess. The more he saw, the more he believed that the inn was designed to cater to low-leveled cultivators, and really only served the purpose of a vacation spot. Naturally, the services were a great boon for earthlings and beasts from Nibiru even, but anyone with a certain amount of standing in a star-class civilization or greater could receive the same benefits through spending money. All in all, the inn seemed unique enough to attract attention, but was generic enough not to step on any high-leveled toes. Perhaps the innkeeper did not have any hidden, ulterior motives, and was only fulfilling a whim of his to run an inn. Who knew what these ancient, powerful beings did to pass the time? Since he had to pass the time waiting for the humans to conclude their meeting, he decided to try out their food. Thorough reconnaissance required every part of the inn to be investigated. In a private room in the Colosseum, the 5 human nascent cultivators were sitting along with the observer sent by the lady in the hologram, and Audrey, of course. Who said ancestor-level cultivators can't be simps? The observer, Adrian, did not contribute much to their discussion, much to the frustration of the others. They were hoping he would provide some insight about the forces of the universe, but he told them nothing. All Adrian said was, "My role on this mission is to only record everything down so I can report it later. I don't have the qualifications or the authority to share information with you freely, as it may affect plans that I am not aware of. All I can say is, you do not need to worry too much. The Jotun Empire is a friendly force, and not our enemy. Having said that, you should maintain the facade that you have no contact with anyone outside of your galaxy." "What about the devils?" the fat man asked. Out of everyone here, he was the only one who had little to no combat experience. Even with his strength, the stigma of devils affected him. Adrian let out an exasperated sigh. "I keep telling you, I am just a clerk. I don't know these things, I am only here to observe. Before this, I didn't even know that devils were a race. Instead of asking me, you should ask the soldiers from the Empire these questions. They will have answers for you. How long are we going to drill him on useless things?" Brandon asked in annoyance, before anyone could question Adrian some more. "Let's focus on what really matters. How has there been no progress on those rebels? My grandson suffered an assassination attempt just so that we could get a few leads. Several families on Earth and the Moon were implicated, not to mention an ICPA. We had the entire country of Egypt on lockdown, yet still we got nothing besides a few dead-ends." Brandon's question caused everyone to grimace. This really was a conundrum. Many years ago, the 5 families had noticed a certain force manipulating people and events to harm their interests. For a while, the force tried to sow discord between the families, something that could have worked if they weren't all actually secretly working together. Losses, scandals, assassinations and more threatened to bring the families to war. Yet, for reasons unknown to the rest, they never worked against one another. At a certain point it became evident that such a strategy would not work, which suppressed that mysterious force's movements, but did not completely finish them. Slowly and steadily the force kept working in the shadows, slowly chipping away at the family's influence and strength. Yet that was also meaningless since the foundation of their strength were the nascent cultivators and there were few that could threaten them. At one point, those forces instigated beasts to act out so that the nascents would be forced to act. That was actually the incident in which Marlowe had also been caught, the time he was in Australia. Yet that yielded no results either. The 5 families did not actually feel threatened by the force, they were just concerned that they may become desperate and do something that would harm the masses. Yet despite their best efforts for years, they were not able to learn the details regarding whoever was behind it all. They did not even know the name of the organization or entity, choosing to call them rebels, for simplicity. It was handled too cleanly, as if they were already expecting to be traced. The entire Sigmund family has been implicated, but we have not been able to find any actual proof of their involvement in the matter. It seems as if they themselves were duped. It's the same with every other lead we have. Then I think it's about time we ask the hard questions. Why do they always know what steps we are going to take? Why are they familiar with our forces and how we are going to act? Brandon's last question caused the rest to grimace even more. "Are you saying some of our families are involved?" "No," Brandon said, shaking his head. "I'm saying at least one person from each family is involved. And not just any random person, someone with influence and knowledge of how the family operates. Silence filled the room, but no one chose to refute him. At this point, even if no one said it out loud, they had all been thinking about the possibility. I think the midnight games will be an opportunity. It's impossible for them not to know that we would be going, even if they weren't involved with the families. They must be planning to make a few big moves during the games. If we're still not able to trace them, then we need to start planning on how to investigate the families themselves. Meeting at the inn will be the most convenient, as we can teleport here directly with no one aware of when we'll be meeting. Everyone eventually came to a consensus, though what they were actually thinking could only be speculated. How easy was it to suspect one's own family? With their dirty laundry handled, it was now time to meet with the Jotun soldiers. The queen had one of her followers let the Empire soldiers know they were ready to meet. At the same time, Marlowe was also brought into the meeting. Marlowe, in fact, was not too popular. Other than the Morrison family, the other families all had a bad impression of him, or at least wanted to keep some distance. But he had interacted with both the zombies and a soldier of the Empire before, so his input could serve to be useful. After a short wait, Ragnar entered the room followed by Slag and Anthony. Marlowe flashed Slag a grin, but did nothing else. Despite his boisterous behavior, he was a shrewd man, and knew when to behave. Greetings, I am General Ragnar Asulf of the Jotun Empire. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Not at all, General. I think we both have much to gain from this meeting, spoke Sam somewhat directly. My name is Sam, and this is Elizabeth, he said, pointing towards the Queen. This is Fade, he said, pointing towards the fat man. This is Richard, and this is Brandon. We have been looking forward to meeting with you. Indeed, it can be quite productive for us both. I've heard a little about Earth from my subordinate, he said, pointing towards Slag. And I'm sure you've heard a little about the Empire as well. We can spend more time getting to know one another, but I think the first and foremost thing on everyone's mind is how we can benefit one another. Compared to the beasts, he was more direct with the humans. There were two reasons for this. Firstly, he was sure that of the 3 planets, Earth was the weakest in terms of military strength. And secondly, in the entire universe, the Jotun Empire was the biggest backer for humans. So whether the Earthlings realized it or not, they were already in the same camp. And if they were in the same camp, they were already Ragnar's subordinates. He just had to make them aware of that fact, with some tact of course. Chapter 122 Fodder. By being so direct, Ragnar took control of the flow of the conversation. The Earthlings had not planned on being so direct, as it was not the way of things. At least, it was not the way of things on Earth. First they had planned on conversing a little, and establishing the basis for a relationship. Now, with the conversation moving directly to the topics of benefits, they had lesser room to maneuver the conversation. This was not mentioning the fact that, if what Slag said was true, there was hardly anything Earth could provide that the Empire didn't already have access to. Unlike when the Morrisons had negotiated with Chen and Lily, who did not have access to unlimited resources and were in great need of support, the Empire probably did not need them to provide spirit stones or ores, or even weapons. So then the question came, what exactly could Earth do for such a giant? Whatever the case may be, the first rule of negotiation was to never let the other know the cards you were holding. Brandon may not have been a good negotiator, but he was definitely shameless enough to lie with a straight face. Indeed, I imagine you would want everyone's full cooperation during the midnight games to ensure that the nodes are destroyed. I'm sure I can convince everyone to send an elite force to the games to assure success if the Empire is willing to concede victory of the games to us, Brandon said in a very serious tone, as if he were doing Ragnar a favor. Fade, or rather the fat man as Brandon had titled him because he would always pretend to mispronounce the name, suddenly felt a great deal of sympathy for Ragnar. Brandon's shamelessness was astronomical. If he were pretending to mispronounce the name, he should at least say fatty so that it would at least sound remotely similar to his name. Not that he particularly minded being fat. He was secretly quite pleased with his girth. Ragnar, though, did not seem fazed by Brandon's remark. He pondered for a moment, as if truly considering the proposal, and then said, "The Innkeeper has not stated an upper limit for the number of cultivators per game, but I'm sure there is a limit. The Empire will have no problem bringing out and equipping tens of thousands of cultivators at each realm, all armed with the latest spirit tech. Yet with a number limit, only the elitist of the elite will have to be selected. If your forces prove to be stronger or more effective than ours, I do not mind working together. It is true, to the Empire successfully destroying the formation is worth more than a prize. If the situation permits, working together is a good option. It's a pity then that the Innkeeper has shut down the combat arena during the games, otherwise we could have our forces compete to settle the matter before the games. After all, if our forces clash during the games, it would be a shame if too many elites go out of commission before the battle with the zombies even begins." Brandon completely ignored the not-so-hidden boast about huge armies with trained elites that were probably better equipped than anyone from Earth, and completely pretended as if Earth were the superior force. I'm sure we can hash out the details. Please, have a seat. We have much to discuss, it seems. They had all still been standing to greet Ragnar when he entered. By telling everyone to be seated, Ragnar once again put himself in a position of power during the meeting. Such subtle nuances, when constantly reinforced, had tremendous ramifications on the subconscious mind. This was a truth even cultivators could not ignore, and was a tactic Marlowe often used when purchasing businesses. It was unfortunate, then, that the recipient of Ragnar's mind games put everyone other than his wife beneath him. His shameless antics had somewhat been an inspiration for Marlowe's own personality, a small detail no one knew. Indeed, with a constant battle against zombies and the added pressure of these devils, I'm sure there are many areas in which Vigus Minima needs Earth's help. The difference between saying Vigus Minima needs help rather than the Empire was a bit of mental manipulation of Brandon's own. It put the planet in a weak position of needing help without directly calling the Empire weak. Ragnar smiled. He did not mind Brandon's aggressive manipulation of the conversation at all. In his eyes, Brandon was a junior nurturing whom would ultimately benefit the Empire. Vigus Minima has been surviving for hundreds of years even before the Empire came to help. It is not in as weak a position as it seems. I'm more curious about Earth. From what I understand, you have just started terraforming the other planets in your solar system. Starting your expansion outwards, you should be careful. Most foreign forces are quite hostile towards others. I'm sure in such a situation, you're in desperate need of information about the universe. Indeed, Brandon replied without skipping a beat. We Earthlings need to be careful not to offend any other forces and attract unwanted attention. Especially those devils, they seem especially dangerous, not to mention all those zombies. Perhaps we need to also consider if it's worth antagonizing such forces just to win an award in the games. Ragnar grinned internally. This Brandon had successfully attracted his attention. If his performance in other areas continued to be stellar, he would definitely mark the man as someone to be nurtured. Yet before Ragnar could respond, Audrey reached out and gently helped Brandon's hand, before speaking in the gentlest of voices. Darling, put your ego away. We're in a meeting, not a cockfight. And General, a little birdie told me that we do not need to be concerned as the Empire would be a friendly force towards us. With that in mind, why don't we inaugurate the first ever meeting between Earth and the Empire with a little bit of sincerity instead of politics? Once she said her piece, Audrey casually leaned back into her chair as if she did not care about the outcome one way or another. She had changed the flow of conversation once again, and in an ingenious way. Bringing up sincerity, she made it so that if Ragnar once again tried to elevate his position in the conversation, or threaten Earth with the unknown, he would immediately mar the relationship between the two. That did not mean that they could not work together, but that any future cooperation would be reserved as everyone protected their own interests. The truth was, Audrey's intentions in speaking up weren't so pure. She was just impatient and didn't want to wait around for the men to stroke their egos before getting to the important stuff. Slag and Anthony frowned, as they did not like the way she spoke to the general, but the man himself let out a visible smile. Indeed, helping out one another will build a stronger relationship. Let me then begin by briefly introducing you all to the forces of the universe. Since you have already been introduced to demons and devils, let me start from there. You all cultivate spiritual energy, as do most beings in the universe. That automatically makes you an enemy of the demons, whether you want it or not. There is no noble cause there, no greater purpose to eliminate evil in the universe. It is simply a matter of survival. Let me elaborate. Demons do not have a specific species or race. Simply put, anyone or anything that cultivates demonic energy is classified as a demon. As for why all demons are your enemies? That's even simpler. Demons grow stronger by feeding on those who cultivate spiritual energy, while those who cultivate spiritual energy grow stronger by feeding on demons. You have already seen the zombies. By absorbing the energy found in the zombies' cores, you can elevate your body cultivation faster than by using most other treasures or medicine you can find. Similarly, as zombies feed on spiritual beings, not only do they grow stronger, they grow smarter as well. The presence of demons in the universe is not weak, and despite being enemies with almost every other force, their threat is very real. Then comes the matter of devils. Things there are more troublesome. As devils do not cultivate demonic energy, the universe is not united against them. Yet somehow, demons treat themselves as the devil's subordinates. Any demon that encounters a devil of the same level or higher will unequivocally obey their orders. Because of this, the devils are able to raise and farm demons in a manner so efficient they are one of the strongest forces in the universe. If the Empire were on its own, there is no doubt at all that it would be eradicated by the devils. At this point Ragnar paused, his smile vanished, and he looked at the representatives with utter seriousness. Unfortunately for you, you once again do not have a say in garnering their hostility. Humans happen to be one of the races the devils love to use as the demons' fodder. Should your planet ever be discovered by a devil, there is no doubt at all that you will undergo the same fate as Minima Vegas, to be brought to the brink of extinction, yet allowed just enough room so that you can survive for centuries, becoming a renewable source for the demons to feed on. Chapter 123 Test. A heavy silence hung in the room as everyone absorbed what Ragnar had said. Marlowe especially recalled the scene where a city was constantly being invaded by endless hordes of zombies. He treated it seriously even when he saw it for the first time, but he imagined that one way or another the zombies would run out, as the rate at which they were being killed was incredible. But when he learned of the spawning portal, he realized the truth was not so simple. They really were on the brink of extinction. What Marlowe did not know was the city he had visited was founded by the Jotun Empire, and it was their presence that garnered such a strong response from the demons. Before their arrival, such a fierce battle had not occurred since the planet first fell. Even though they all knew that Earth was not as alone as they portrayed, it was good to be reminded that the universe was a cruel place. They could not even completely secure their planet from internal strife, strong external threats could spell their doom. Any other enemies that we should know of? Brandon asked. Enemies who target humans specifically? Not so many. But any random force can become your enemy should they see profit in doing so. Even allies of the Empire are only allies of the Empire in a broad sense. That does not prevent them from seizing control of individual planets or solar systems where they can gain benefits. The only way to gain security is to have a strong enough backer. Isn't that always the case? Brandon remarked offhandedly. It was just a larger example of paying a thug protection money. Most notable forces in the universe are based around their species. For example, of the beasts, some of the strongest clans are the Leviathan clan, the Terror Crow clan and the Serpent clan. Other notable examples are the Dread clan and, ironically, the Goliath clan. Why ironically? Asked Brandon. Relatively speaking, the Goliath clan is the newest power in the known universe. Their species started out as a mutation of humans that originated on a single planet. When they were discovered by other humans, they were shunned and even persecuted. But as fate would have it, a prince of the Jotun Empire ended up befriending a Goliath. Out of friendship, the prince granted the Goliaths protection and allowed them room to grow. Since no one was paying attention to them, no one noticed how quickly their strength grew. What should have been the beginning of an amazing friendship and partnership soured when that prince suddenly died. Long story short, the Goliaths broke away from the humans and quickly surpassed them. Fortunately, they do not hold a grudge against the humans, but they are in no way allies of humans either. Ragnar paused for a moment, as if thinking about something, but quickly returned back to the topic. This does not mean that all forces are based around their species. Most recently, after many millennia of war against one another, dwarves and elves have actually formed a coalition. Similarly, many forces are formed from the union of various groups. I cannot even begin to list out all the forces. It would take too long. The purpose in me telling you this is to let you know that since you have started expanding outwards, you must also prepare for the threats. It is entirely possible that your planet may not encounter other forces for centuries, or could run into a band of pirates tomorrow. And let me guess, you suggest we join the Empire? Ragnar grinned, watching the children with amusement. To be clear, to the 3,500-year-old Ragnar, these nascent cultivators of Earth were indeed children. Joining the Empire is not so easy or simple. Your planet cannot join simply because you are human, or because you wish it. At most, talented individuals from your planet can be recruited for now. Before even beginning to consider the requirements of the Empire, the location of your planet will determine whether you are even eligible. If your planet falls under the domain of another force, then unfortunately, you are on your own. Technically, they weren't on their own even if they were in someone else's domain, but Ragnar could not be bothered to explain the details. The politics of the universe were a lot more complicated and had many more layers than that of Earth. For now, this level of detail was sufficient. What he did not expect was that instead of feeling pressured, they felt a burden lift off their shoulders, knowing that the Empire was not recruiting them directly. Even as arrogant as Brandon was, he did not want to imagine the consequences of offending such an entity by refusing their offer. So if you are not looking to recruit Earth, other than help in the games, what benefits are you actually looking for? Asked the Queen directly. It is always in the interest of the Empire to see humans grow and prosper, even if they are not under the banner of the Empire itself. But even with that in mind, nothing in the world is absolutely free. There are many ways in which we can benefit one another, but I directly propose what I think is the best deal to you. Earth will send 500,000 men and women under the age of 30 to receive training in various fields such as medicine, mechanics, computing, cultivation, crafting and more for 500 years, during which they will be employed by the Empire. Another 500,000 will be employed under the same conditions for 300 years, and another 500,000 for 100 years. As a part of their salary, the Empire will provide Earth with some basic knowledge and technology that will boost the growth of your own civilization, while the rest of the salary will be paid to them directly. Once the employment period for these people is over, they are free to return to Earth, at which point their own skills and expertise will be enough to slingshot your planet's growth while also strengthening its own foundations. The Earthlings did not reply immediately, and only exchanged looks with one another filled with a meaning they all understood very well. Ragnar's offer seemed straightforward, but was layered with both benefits as well as tests. He did not say it, but the offer was a blatant test of their character. Theoretically speaking, as nascent-leveled cultivators, their life expectancy barely reached 500 years. This meant that if they accepted the offer, in the future, Earth would be flooded with cultivators at their level, along with the potential to surpass them. This may not affect them directly as they may never break through a higher realm and may not even live to see the day the last recruits return, but it would be clear that the position of their respective families would be threatened very seriously. This was not even considering the 2 waves of recruits who would come back first, who would also be brimming with the strength and potential that came with the nurturing of a superior civilization. It was a test to first see if they valued the growth and prosperity of their people over their own desire for power. Second, to see if they had the courage to send their own families as a part of the recruitment, as that would possibly be the only way they could continue to maintain their position of power in the future. Another layer of the test was that even if they sent their own children or grandchildren, which one of the 3 waves of recruits would they be a part of? The longer they stayed away, the lesser their attachment to the planet they spent the first few decades of their life on. So then, would they even be willing to return to the backwards planet to struggle and help it grow? We will need some time to discuss this, Brandon finally said. Take your time. Watching your people during the games will also give me a chance to see the caliber of the people of Earth. In the future, Anthony will coordinate with you on this, so you can approach him once you've decided on how you want to proceed. He will also coordinate with you on how we can cooperate during the games. After seeing all that he wanted to see, Ragnar delegated handling the nitty-gritty of things to his subordinates. Overall, the trip to the inn had been very beneficial, but he had to return to focusing on his original task. Since the Innkeeper was no longer around and the Midnight in itself wanted to establish itself as a neutral organization, the things that required his personal attention were all taken care of. Now it was time for him to return to Vigus Minima and start preparing for what came next. Chapter 124 The Third Procedure. Once Ragnar left, Anthony took over the negotiations. Compared to the general, he was a lot more straightforward. He directly set the terms and conditions, and if the Earthlings found it disagreeable or difficult to meet or wanted to negotiate a bit, he would dismiss it and move on to the next potential point for cooperation. In the end, they didn't end up agreeing on anything as the Earthlings either wanted time to discuss amongst themselves or were contingent upon their performance in the first round of the combat portion of the games. Still, Anthony was not disappointed or disgruntled and scheduled a time for their next meeting in which they would finalize a lot of their cooperation. The difference in treatment between how Ragnar and Anthony treated them was like night and day. Ragnar could be willful, but Anthony was strictly professional. It also gave them a clear understanding of how little importance they were to the Empire. Perhaps the only reason they received any attention at all in the first place was because they met at the inn. If the Empire had encountered them elsewhere, with their current strength and standing, they may as well have been ignored. Once the meeting was concluded, they passed any instructions they had to their own subordinates and returned to Earth to once again convene with the woman in the hologram. Brandon, who was the most concerned about the rebels, inquired about any suspicious movement or activities while they were gone. The answer he received was that everything was normal, which worried him more than relieved him. There was no way the rebels didn't know about the meeting. If they didn't use this opportunity to make any moves, then maybe they would do so during the games. There was also the potential that they would not do anything during the games as well, but he did not think an organization with the guts to try and assassinate his grandson would miss out on such opportunities. With limited forces on Earth and no new information to act on, he decided to put Mars under martial law. Any and all activity was stopped until further notice, and all military forces were put on full alert. Truthfully speaking, Mars was in the least danger, as it was impossible to approach the planet without being spotted, and he had strict control over everything on Mars, unlike on Earth, where the division of power was too great. Still, he did not want to take chances. They reconvened the meeting with the lady, and instead of giving the report themselves, Adrian was the one who made the report. Once she heard the report, she ruminated for a bit before saying, "You are free to send anyone you want to the Jotun Empire for training, but only if you can send your recruits through the inn itself. You cannot, under any circumstance, accept any deal that would need you to reveal the location of Earth. Furthermore, keep in mind that while it is okay to send people away from Earth, those sent away cannot come back, ever. As for matters of running into outside forces, you need not concern yourself with it. If you should ever encounter such a threat, we will take care of it. Not to mention, the space near and around your solar system is under our supervision. Should another advanced civilization have existed, we would have already known of it. The chances of space pirates are even lower, so you need not concern yourself." The discussion went on for a while longer, but the gist of it was that the lady in the hologram did not care what they did as long as they did not expose the location of Earth and followed her orders regarding her guests that she had sent to Earth. The relative freedom and general assurances provided by the woman relieved the Earthlings a lot. All they had to consider now was what to do about Ragnar's offer. Sending people away was not a problem, but if they ultimately could never return, then what even was the point of sending them in the first place? Maybe they could send out people they hoped could create a better life for themselves amongst the uncertainty of the universe. Little did they know, they weren't the only ones deliberating over this deal. Far, far in the universe on the planet Vegas Minima, Ragnar was looking solemnly at a report. More specifically, he was looking at the words, Earth, classified. Once he returned from Vegas Minima he needed to report the situation, but the gains were drastically more than expected. As a result, instead of providing a report in the usual way, he had to initiate a platinum-level confidential transmission. As a result of his transmission, it wasn't only the army that was notified, but also the aristocracy of the empire. A nobleman and a commanding general appeared as holograms before him, staring at him with a dignified look. Unfortunately, when a transmission over a certain rank occurred, usually it was bad news. Such was the volatility of the universe. Ragnar began his report by first stating his assessment of the Midnight Inn as a neutral organization with a SS rank danger potential. To emphasize this point, he informed them that a celestial seemed to be a subordinate of the Innkeeper. The key word here was seemed, as they did not know the details, but putting up such an appearance in itself was impressive. Then he reported about Earth and Nibiru. Finally, he reported on the demons and devils. When he told them that he had managed to capture their aura signatures using the device in his eye, they were over the moon. Even Ragnar did not know why Loretta was so high up on the wanted list, but the fact that he had obtained her aura was of the utmost importance to the Empire. Of course, it was more than likely that the aura she exuded was fake, and had undergone some concealing or transformation technique. The Empire would still have ways to make use of it. This was a game of subterfuge they had been playing with the devils for hundreds of thousands of years. Once the transmission was concluded, Ragnar was undertaking preparation for the days to come when he got a report. He had searched for the names Nibiru and Earth, just in case, to see if there was anything about them in the Empire's database. As expected, there was no information on Nibiru, so he made an entry and associated it with the fiery mammoths. Unexpectedly, though, there was an entry on Earth. However, it was classified. If, even with his level, he was unable to view the details, then matters relating to Earth were not so simple. After a moment, he simply put the report aside. He could not be bothered to delve into the details regarding Earth. His only focus ever was the demons. If Earth could aid him then he would make use of them, otherwise he would forget about them by the next day. On Nibiru, the response was completely different. Most beasts were not interested at all. Being suppressed made them feel uncomfortable, and they had no interest in returning. The few that were interested put everything aside and began preparations. During this time, the letter that Tiffany and Lex had put much effort into having delivered to the Lord Protector of Red Nation arrived at the Protector's shrine. Yet Ijashima, the Lord Protector, was still in the Midnight Inn, completely unaware that it was being plotted against. Back at the inn, things were progressing smoothly even without Lex's presence. Which was fortunate because he only woke up some 8 hours later, still feeling somewhat fatigued. Without leaving his bed, he ordered a ridiculous amount of food as he slowly watched replays of everything that had happened while he was asleep. Lex would not describe himself as a spy, stalker or voyeur, but anyone else who saw him so frequently listening in on his guests definitely would. Still, it was important to know what was happening. When he caught up, he decided to stay put for a while. In the few hours he'd been asleep, he'd made 20,000 MP from guests purchasing various products and using his services, bringing his total to 95,356 MP. Which was nice, because he decided that before the games start, he will undergo the third procedure to upgrade his cultivation which would affect his soul. It was not a small expense, but he did not want to wait either. The stronger he was, the easier it would be for him. Lex paid, and the next moment found himself in the White Room. He did not even get enough time to finish his sigh before he was once again knocked unconscious, and the process to evolve his soul began. Compared to the previous two, this one was a lot harder and would take a longer time. But fortunately he would be done before the event actually started. Chapter 125 Capitalism Across the Universe. There were 4 days between the meeting of the 3 worlds and the Midnight Games. A lot happened during those 4 days, not only on the 3 planets and the Midnight Inn, but amongst the various forces inhabiting the world. Starting at the lowest level, the atmosphere on Earth became very lively all of a sudden. Rumor had it that various companies, families and organizations received a mysterious invitation. Only the heads of those organizations got the invitation, but when considering that the invitations were sent worldwide, the number easily reached thousands. A lesser-known fact was that the elite troops and cultivators for each power and organization were quickly recalled. An even lesser-known fact, and one that scared the few who even heard it, was that the 5 ruling families released a statement inviting the head of the rebels to a meeting. What happened as a result of that, and if the meeting was ever held, was unknown. A secret that was spread only in the Morrison family was that Alexander left his family's security bunker and relocated to one that he had built himself. Even his father or grandfather were not privy to the details of this bunker, as Alexander has used his own power and forces nurtured by himself since youth to have it made. It must be remembered that since Alexander reached the Foundation realm, his family could no longer tell him what to do. His intention to participate in the games was clear. What the rest could only do was pray. Something that wasn't a secret, and was the source of much speculation and gossip, was Marlowe's brief return to New York. His visit was swift, as he was still not healed. He did not meet his mother, who had returned from the hospital, nor did he greet his students or address his many businesses. He went directly to his wife. Their confrontation was extremely violent and caused the immediate deployment of Bluebird Special Forces. Even though higher-leveled cultivators were given many allowances, it was only up until a certain point. Some lines could not be crossed. An arrest warrant for both husband and wife was issued, but both of them disappeared just as spontaneously as Marlowe appeared. What was the conclusion of the fight? Why did it happen? What was the fallout? All of these were questions that currently remained unanswered. Another interesting rumor also spread on the online cultivator portals. The Brown family, the family led by Sam Brown, one of the 5 nascents, revealed a secret regiment so powerful and technologically advanced, it outshone the strongest Morrison force. Such rumors were flying rampantly on the web, and everyone was waiting in anticipation for something to happen. The common masses were unaware what caused all this commotion, but they were awaiting the outcome. On Nibiru there were fewer movements, but that did not mean there were none. Blood Fang gathered all its subordinates, not only in its own territory, but in the surrounding territories as well. Some other beasts were also preparing their forces, though whether it was for the games or other purposes, no one knew. Yet Nibiru was not connected via the web like Earth, so more or less there was no change for the masses. On Vigus Minima, however, the tension was palpable. All forces were put on reserve. Full forces were deployed in each city. All travel off the planet was stopped. All volunteers were called for deployment and all civilians were put under house arrest. Ragnar did not know how the Innkeeper would prevent external interference during the attack on nodes, but he would not take any risks. All his soldiers were deployed with location trackers. As soon as they re-entered the planet during the games, their locations would be revealed. Regardless of how the games went, Ragnar would have the location of the nodes and would attack in full force, once the games were over, of course. There was no point in provoking the Innkeeper. Not to mention, how could the Innkeeper make such a low-level mistake? He was sure that there would be some precautions to prevent external interference. The devils, likewise, made their own preparations, though their preparations were very different. They simply recalled the 5 strongest zombies on the planet and sent them back to Garvitz. It was a pity that they could not be nurtured longer, but it was simply a matter of sending them to a different farm. The loss of a farm as small as Vigus Minima mattered little to them. Not to mention, it was not as if the upcoming battle would leave them without benefits. Using formations already in place, they would automatically harvest all the zombie cores for all the zombies that died in the upcoming battle. The realm was a little low, but even devils had low-leveled youths that needed resources so they would not go to waste. In fact, this was the greatest tragedy that the Jotun Empire had to face. They utilized all their resources and forces at great personal cost to fight the demons, but the loss of demons would never make the devils weaker. It would only enhance their personal strength. Somewhere else in Garvitz, the upper echelon passed an order regarding the Midnight Inn. As to what the order was, no one could know. Similarly, the details of the Midnight Inn were presented in front of the highest authorities of the empire, besides the royal family itself. In fact, even the William family was presented with information that it was suspected that the treasure Lex originally received may have had something to do with the inn. But since he had given the treasure up already, they did not pay it any more attention. Each and every one of them had many matters to deal with. The changes in the inn were the most drastic. More and more people and beasts entered the inn, and started renting rooms and preparing for the games. Disappointing many, the innkeeper did not appear again during this time. Yet there were a few members of the inn who became extremely well known. It went without saying that Little Blue was declared the unofficial mascot of the inn. It was still very young and easily startled, so only a few people were allowed by the galactic sovereign turtle to approach it at one time. The second prominent member, unexpectedly, was Gerard. You could often see him leading a fleet of golf carts across the inn premises. Initially, he just enjoyed the ride. However, with experience, his handling of the cart improved, and with that, his driving style changed. The old man could now be seen taking guests around as if he were drag racing, often drifting the cart in ways that should not have been possible, literally. The speed and momentum of his golf cart did not make sense or obey the laws of physics. Many wondered what secrets he had, but no one had the courage to make him reveal them. The third most popular, to his great dismay, was Z. It was unknown when exactly, but a group of women that was sent to the Midnight Inn to prepare for the culture show discovered him, instantly activating their motherly instincts. The poor, frail, and overworked child was constantly smothered by the group. His popularity was due to the fact that he could often be seen walking around the inn, surrounded by a protective entourage of mothers. He kept telling them that he didn't need to be outdoors and had already touched grass, but when has a mother ever felt her instincts were wrong? John was also fairly popular, but very few people actually saw him because he had not taken a single moment's break and was constantly making techniques. Since he could only see one customer at a time, in 4 days he had only met around 70 customers. Harry had seen even fewer guests, as he was very careful about whose hair he cut now. His previous incident left him with a migraine that he would not soon forget. Still, everyone who had the privilege of experiencing his craft was a complete fan. Finally, early on the 4th day, the innkeeper reappeared. He announced the opening ceremony would take place at 1 p.m., so there were a few hours left. He instructed all participants to start getting ready. The stage in the Colosseum seemed to expand, and the more people that entered it the bigger it became. Yet from the outside, the size of the Colosseum remained the same. Lex observed the crowds with a smile on his face. He did not expect to feel so happy seeing so many guests in his inn, but he was. There were just a few minor additions that he needed to make before he could begin the ceremony. Fortunately, over the past 4 days, he'd earned another 64,000 MP, mostly from people buying the Midnight Game commemorative coin and the rest from his services. Even after spending 20,000 MP on his third procedure, he had 139,400 MP. There was just enough for him to spend. After all, since the first portion of the games was about sharing one's culture, how could he not share capitalism with the universe? Chapter 126 Circus. Lex wanted to sell merchandise, but flashing banners and passing out flyers were too tacky. He also didn't want to be like a low-budget tech company and sell t-shirts. No, whatever he sold had to have class, first and foremost. It also had to be exclusive. He opened his panel and quickly designed the item he had in mind. Unlike the Midnight Games commemorative coin, which was made from a special material, the next item he designed was not special in its material. Instead, its look and feel were what Lex focused on as well as, oddly enough, its smell. What Lex was designing was a suit. It was the same suit that all his guards wore and, more importantly, the one Little Blue wore. As much as Lex wanted to give the suit special protective abilities, that would become too expensive for him at the moment. He settled for the suit's ability to look flattering regardless of who wore it, feel great to wear and always smell amazing. It also came with a gold lapel pin with the initials MI that one could wear or take off. The price for the suit was 9,000 MP. It was the single most expensive item he was selling at the moment, priced far more than even the Tier 4 zombie core that he once sold. The suit did not have a functional purpose like the core, but Lex had no doubt that it would definitely sell. When people achieved a certain level of success, they spent more on luxury than other things. Lex made a quick mental note to hire a really good tailor. The one drawback to this was it was becoming relatively apparent that the inn put a lot of emphasis on attire that originated on Earth. But Lex did not care. He was the innkeeper. Who did he need to explain himself to? With that done, and an embarrassing 40,000 MP spent on preparing 100 of those suits, Lex was ready to proceed. Quickly making an appearance as Leo, he went towards the guild room and added a commission for items that could nurture low-level souls. This was necessary, as Mary let him know that, unlike his previous two procedures, there was nothing he could do to accelerate the stabilization process himself. The only option he had was to use medicine or natural treasures that nurtured the soul, both of which were rare and expensive. He could only hope someone would quickly respond to his commission. Following that, he changed back to the Innkeeper and appeared in the Colosseum, where hundreds of smaller, individual stages were set up on the main stage. When the event began, guests would be able to walk between the smaller stages and view them from up close or stay seated and watch projections of them. For those who were in their rooms or sitting elsewhere, they would be able to summon individual projections to view the several stages. They would be able to flick through the different stages like channels on a TV in the pre-streaming era. The event management panel would record live the genuine response from each audience member to each stage that they saw. For those whose presentation comprised a play or performance, the inn would automatically record it and play it back for anyone who wanted to view it. This would avoid having them constantly perform. Something interesting Lex noticed was that many people from Earth who were setting up their stages actually did not know where they were, or the significance of what they were doing. They had just been given massive financial incentives by their superiors and thought they were performing at a special event. Lex wondered what they thought about arriving here by the use of the key, but it seemed some sort of explanation must have been given to them prior, as they just casually accepted it. Just as the center stage was filling up, so were the seats. Most of the viewers were human, even those were mostly from Earth. A few of the guests were from Vegas Minima, and even those were mostly soldiers. The only civilians from Vegas Minima seemed to be a small group brought by Chen and Lily. The number of beasts was in double digits. It seemed that such an event did not really appeal to beasts. For future reference, he would have to remember that. What did make him happy was that many of his guests were enjoying a Saturn cake, and the smell of it was enticing the other guests nearby. The environment was jolly and festive, and all the guests were behaving. That's what he liked to see. At 12 p.m. Lex made an wide announcement that the opening ceremony will begin in 1 hour, prompting all the bigwigs to show up. The representatives of the 5 families sat together, while Ragnar and his entourage sat in another corner. Worth noticing was that only 2 devils remained, probably the ones who would be managing the stalls, and the rest had disappeared somewhere. Of the beasts, Golden Hair and Green's Haven sat side by side. As the time neared for the opening ceremony, Lex once again felt himself getting nervous. He closed his eyes and took deep breaths. Entering the state of flow was not easy, and not something he could control. To be exact, he did not even know what that state was or why it drained him so much. Even Mary was unclear about it, though to be fair her knowledge was limited by the inn's authority level. As much as he wanted to re-enter that state, he was unable to. So, when it was finally 1 p.m., he appeared in the air in front of the massive crowd with some nervousness in his heart. He was unable to calm himself down, but he continuously brainwashed himself by saying that he was completely calm. "Welcome," he said with a loud and forceful voice, hushing the various crowds around the inn. "Welcome to the Midnight Games. Some of you may already know about them, and some of you may not, so I will simply say this. The Midnight Games are to promote friendship and camaraderie between different worlds, and to introduce you to new possibilities. By understanding and experiencing each other's cultures, you may develop bonds that you carry with you throughout your lives. I won't say much, long speeches are not really my style. I hereby announce that the Midnight Games now begin." He clapped his hands loudly as he concluded, and as if on cue, 2 streams of fireworks spread into the sky and exploded in a spectacular display of colors. His speech was exactly 1 minute long, and as soon as it ended, various things started happening at once. Invisible walls were constructed around the individual stages, so that the performers would not be interrupted by any heckling. Only positive sounds would be let through, such as clapping and applause, and even those in moderate amounts so as to not disturb them. On the stages, the air itself seemed to become fresher. All the performers felt invigorated and felt as if they could go all day if they needed to. From silence the inn slowly went to the steady buzz that accompanied any festival. In total, there were 3,427 stages, of which 3,000 came from Earth. Although Lex did not want to jump the gun, it was safe to say that Earth had a great advantage in this portion. Around 70 of the stages were from various beasts, and the rest were all soldiers. Lex himself was a little curious about the various displays, but first he had to ensure that everything was progressing smoothly. At opposite ends of the main stage were 2 recruitment stalls, one for the Empire and one for the Devils. What they hoped to achieve was beyond Lex, but a part of him had really been concerned about facilitating leading Devils back to Earth. Fortunately, he overheard Brandon saying that Earth was under some kind of protection and it would be impossible for anyone to find the location of Earth, even if someone was tricked into taking back a transmitter or locator of some sort. Nibiru most likely did not have such protection, but the sloth did not seem to be worried. After spending a dozen minutes to see if any problems arose, Lex finally breathed a sigh of relief when nothing happened. Finally he turned his attention to the various stages and started admiring them. Internally he was extremely nervous, hoping that the performances were a success. It was not only the incentive of the quest that motivated Lex, he did not want the inn's first major event to end up in failure. He walked to the first stage and noticed acrobats swinging around using tight ropes. At first he thought this was circus, until he noticed the performers were all at Chi training realm. In that case, there had to be more to it, right? Chapter 127 Exhibitionists. This particular stage was 50 feet wide and 30 feet long. There were 2 individual tight ropes going from end to end on either side that some of the acrobats were walking atop. Several ropes hung from the ceiling as well that the rest of the acrobats used to swing from side to side. Synchronously acrobats from the left and right swung towards the center at the same time. Hay let go of the ropes and did a few flips in the air before latching onto the rope that the other had just used with their feet. Lex himself had never been to a circus, but had seen enough of them on the television. Their performance was very impressive and the timing of it was immaculate, especially when you considered there was no safety net below. Yet somehow, Lex had expected a little more when he noticed they were cultivators. To be fair, their performance had just begun. They were likely warming up the crowd before. But Lex did not want to wait as there were many other stages as well. He would watch a replay of this later to see if they did anything more interesting. Driven by curiosity, Lex skipped all the human stages and went to a beast one. This particular stage was not raised like the rest, but was instead lowered so that the viewers would have a top-down view. A layer of sand covered the stage, and various snakes slithered through it. At first, Lex did not understand what they were meant to be doing. He observed each snake individually and focused on it as it went from slithering on the surface to somewhere below it. The confusion disappeared, however, when he noticed that his focus should not be on the snakes but on the sand. Influenced by dozens of snakes moving in calculated coordination, the sand pulsed, as if a beating heart lay right under it. Dunes rose and fell quickly in the sand, making it feel as if Lex was watching an accelerated view of a changing desert. Slowly, he became aware of patterns in the rise and fall of the sand, but to view it he had to stop focusing on the sand, and somehow focus on the whole. This was a little difficult for humans, as the human eye was designed to be attracted to and focus on certain points. To forcefully stop yourself from focusing on a certain point and somehow taking in the whole was a bit of a challenge, and something most others would miss out on unless they were actively trying to do so. Lex had an easy out in this, as he could rely on his awareness of the entire inn to view the stage as a whole, rather than focusing on it with his eyes. But the moment he did so was when Lex realized just how much he was actually missing and was momentarily stunned. The movement of the sand had a strange kind of symmetry. The rise and fall of the dunes started forming patterns in the landscape and started to form some kind of art. This was unlike the art humans created, but seemed like it was a creation of nature. It was so wholly random even while maintaining its previous pattern. It was like Lex was becoming aware of the course of how things progressed as nature intended. He was reminded of an old documentary he saw about repeating shapes and patterns in nature called fractals, where the shape or pattern would be repeated on various scales. Whether you focused in on a certain part, or focused out on the larger whole, the patterns would be present. The strange way of repeating the pattern is also what gave birth to the sense of symmetry. But if all there was to it, Lex would not have been so overwhelmed. The depth of the snake's art was not just limited to the visage of it. When Lex used his awareness to view the stage, he also felt the vibrations in the sand. As the snakes moved through the different layers, the way the sand in between the layers rose and fell between them, the way they rubbed against other grains of sand and the way they pressed against the scales of the snakes produced a sensation Lex could only describe as music. The oscillations weren't large enough to produce a sound greater than a gentle hum, one that could easily have been mistaken for wind, gently caressing the dunes into its desired shape like the paintbrush of an artist. Yet since Lex was aware of it in greater detail, he felt the same visual pattern emerge in each and every vibration. He saw the pattern in the way that each grain of sand fell, and in the way that each grain of sand rose. The pattern that emerged was so much greater than the two-dimensional ones he had seen on paper, or a three-dimensional one a person might encounter in an art exhibit. The pattern existed in the top-down view. It existed between the layers. It existed in the vibrations. It existed in the way the snakes moved. For a moment, Lex felt himself enter a trance, and felt a strange thought form right outside of his range of perception. It was like a word on the tip on his tongue. He knew what it was, but could not say it. The feeling was abstract, yet at the same time concrete. Not bad, Lex murmured, and decided to make a change to the stage. Currently, to prevent the performers, each stage prevented spiritual senses from coming through. Yet now, Lex changed it so that others would be able to use their spiritual senses only to view the stage. This would still prevent them from using it to pressure or communicate with the performers. Lex did not want others to disturb the snakes, yet at the same time he wanted them to enjoy it on a greater level, as just simply viewing the sand would leave them missing out. Indeed, if some simply focused on the snakes, and did not take in the whole, this was probably one of the least interesting exhibits. It was only snakes moving in the sand. He hoped others would also be able to pick up on the intricacies of this display. What Lex did not realize was that all the people at the top of each respective world were paying a lot of attention to the innkeeper's every move. His murmur may have been soft, but it was like an announcement on a loudspeaker for them. Especially when they felt the changes on the stage, they immediately used their spiritual senses to try and observe the peculiarity of this display. Whether any of them noticed it to the depth that Lex had, there was no way of knowing. Impressed by what he had just witnessed, Lex went to the next beast stage. This one only had two beasts that Lex had never seen or recognized before. This beast's hind legs were similar to that of a frog and allowed it to leap long distances and far into the air. Yet, unlike a frog, this beast was around 4 feet in length and 3 feet in height. Its body was covered in violet hexagonal scales that reflected light in an unusual way. Lex had never encountered light that he had to describe as dark, but that was the only description he could think of at the moment. Near the neck of the beast, colorful feathers started emerging from within the scales and covered its forelegs and shoulder blades. It did not seem enough to allow the beast to fly, but Lex imagined that the beast could glide great distances. Yet as the stage provided was not big enough, the two beasts were not gliding, but seemed to be doing a dance. They would leap towards one another from the ends of the stage and twirled effortlessly in the air. Its shining scales, bright feathers and intricate moves enamored the viewers, making them completely oblivious to how lethal its moves exactly were. As the beasts approached one another they did not collide, but somersaulted in the air and clapped their hind legs against each other's. Then, pushing against one another, they leaped higher into the air, all the while not forgetting to twirl. Once they reached the peak of the jump, and had no other platform to push against, they spread their forelegs and formed thin wings akin to the gliders used by humans. Moving counterclockwise, they glided down in the air, dancing in the air, near one another. It was a spectacular show indeed, and Lex was very impressed by the visuals. It was unfortunate then that his wonder was completely deflated when he overheard another beast saying that they were displaying their mating ritual. He supposed exhibitionism transcended species and even worlds. Lex quickly moved away from the stage before he saw something he would regret. Chapter 128 Ballerina. While Lex was strolling through the various stages, taking on the role of a tourist, he was completely unaware that seeds of chaos had been planted on the 3 planets, and were getting ready to sprout. On Earth, the rebel forces started rearranging their forces with a little more aggression. They only had a limited amount of time where they could get ready, and they had to take chances at getting caught to ensure they were ready when the second portion of the game started. The combat portion of the games, when the various military forces the 5 families had taken with them would be committed, would be the beacon that lights the beginning of their revolution. How their movements remained undetected by not only the forces of the families but the ICPAs, which were supposed to be independent organizations, was a total mystery. Even if they somehow managed to take control of the Earth before the return of the nascents and their forces, how they would deal with the raw power of the 5 strongest humans on Earth was another mystery that yet had no answer. While on Earth the chaos was only on the edge, hiding from the view of potential informants, on Nibiru there was no such case. Various territories had been brought to war by sudden invasions from their neighbors. The absence of the territory leader, such as Ijishima, or of a large chunk of combatants, made the territories vulnerable. In Red Nation, a lazy-looking brown fox stood, or rather, lay groggily at the head of the invading forces. The real villain behind the scenes, the enigmatic head of the Iron Mountain, was as of yet absent. Though despite his own absence, his forces were definitely present. Yet, even without Ijishima present to command its beasts, Red Nation, which was heavily reliant on human management, had an organized army which managed to hold off the invading forces. Even the 13-year-old Tiffany, who had been awarded a strengthening fruit for her brave actions of delivering the letter, fought valiantly at the front lines. She had assumed her good friend Lex had died so that she could escape, which filled her with a sorrow and anger she had never felt before in her life. It was even worse than when Father Henry was captured, because at least she still knew he was alive. It must be pointed out that eating a strengthening fruit did not technically count as cultivation, which is why it did not adhere to the general rule that humans cannot cultivate before the age of 15. Even then, the rule that one cannot cultivate until they were 15 was not a hard and fast rule. Can you imagine someone waiting arduously for their 15th birthday, and then on their birthday they have to wait for some specific hour, such as 2 p.m., because that was the exact hour they were born in? The moment the clock hit 2 p.m., that person would start cultivating, only to fail miserably. Turns out they were born in a different time zone and needed to wait a few more hours till they were exactly 15. No, the 15-year-old age limit was more of a guideline, because that is the age by which a human body would have developed enough to withstand the arduous journey which was cultivation. Using special treatments to strengthen the body was one of the ways a person could get ready to cultivate in advance. It just so happened eating strengthening fruits was one of those ways. On Vegas Minima, the devils really started treating the planet if they were about to lose it, and sent all their zombie hordes to attack human settlements. They also deployed a special kind of demon known as grubber worms, which specialized in recovery. The worms recovered not only the dead zombies, but the dead humans as well. What they intended with those bodies, besides the zombie cores, was as yet unknown. Of the 3 planets, Vegas Minima was the most chaotic, yet somehow it was also the one dealing with the situation best. But the chaos had only just begun, and there were many opportunities to make mistakes. Lex, the person who could be said to have indirectly caused all 3 situations, was completely unaware. He had seen various performances already, but there were many more left to go. Fortunately, the first part of the cultural event would go on all day, and the second part would only begin the next day. At a certain point, Lex decided to depart, and come back in his Leo persona. He noticed quickly that any time he would approach a stage as the Innkeeper, people would either move away or hush up, scared to offend him. When Lex, or rather Leo, returned, his attention was caught by a stage where he saw a single ballerina dancing. So far Lex had enjoyed the Beast's performances more, but maybe that was because those were novel sights, whereas he had some knowledge of Earth's culture already. Yet this ballerina was different. Suffice to say, she was breathtakingly beautiful. Lex felt a little shallow, thinking that the first thing that caught his attention was her looks, especially when her performance was extraordinary. Yet at the same time, he would be a hypocrite if he did not admit that the best and most apt description of this woman could be summarized in a single word: beautiful. Lex was not paying attention to her gorgeous phoenix eyes, her thin pink lips, her sleek jaw, her smooth cheeks, or her flowing brown hair. No, he was mesmerized by her entire visage. The various silk layers of her tutu flowed in the air like dancing birds as she twirled on a string so thin it was invisible to the naked eye. The gray see-through cape she wore sparkled, leaving behind a trail of images of dancing butterflies, following her wherever she went. Lex had never seen a ballet before and so did not have an understanding of what it was supposed to entail, but he was pretty sure that the enrapturing performance being put on by this one woman was only possible because of her ridiculously high cultivation of peak golden core. Yes, unexpectedly, this woman was a soldier from Vegas Minima. Maybe Lex should not have been so surprised, as even soldiers were human, but he was just not expecting such a spectacular display from a soldier. It took a while for Lex to wake from his trance. At this point, the ballerina was no longer simply dancing on an impossibly thin string. She was dancing vertically and horizontally as the strings went in every direction. At some points, she even danced upside down. This was an experience he would have missed had he been wearing the host attire, as it would have prevented him from fully falling into a trance. Finally, when Lex started feeling embarrassed from staring at the beautiful woman for too long, he decided to leave. Instead of heading towards another display, this time he walked towards the Empire's recruitment stall. He was very curious about what their intentions were, and wanted to experience it for himself. The inn was not facilitating transport from one planet to another en masse yet, and Earth was determined to stay hidden, so what were their intentions? What Lex did not know was that Ragnar had completely dropped all of his plans and intentions for Earth after discovering that it had some secret. He did not want to get involved, nor did he care enough to distract himself from his mission. Still, when Lex arrived at the stall there was a small line. At the forefront was the smallest beast Lex had seen so far. Generally, once beasts started cultivating, their size would grow. This one was roughly the size of a hamster. It had 6 legs, a scaly body and a face that looked like a dog's. What it was, Lex had no idea, but it was in the golden core realm, so it definitely wasn't weak. Lex was unable to hear the discussion between the beast and the soldiers, a result of a small formation they set up on their own. Yet from the looks of it, they both were very satisfied by the result. A few people were ahead of him in line, but Lex waited patiently. When it was finally his turn he spoke first, not giving them a chance. "What kind of performance are you guys doing? How come your stage is different from the rest?" "Ours is not a performance," one of the soldiers said amicably. "We're here representing the Jotun Empire, the largest human force in the universe. Our job here is to provide you with information not just about the universe, but about how to grow individually as well as bring growth to your own society. After all, the prosperity and growth of humans is in both of our interests." "Oh, how so?" Lex asked, completely ready for the upcoming barrage of propaganda. Chapter 129 Civilization Ranks. The soldiers studied Lex for a moment, with him still being in his Leo persona, and quickly judged him to be an inexperienced youth. This did not put him at ease, as he had not intended to fool Lex to begin with. He was just disappointed that the effectiveness of their instructional course would drop. There are a few things to keep note of about the universe. According to our notes, your civilization has not achieved interstellar travel nor has it been contacted by external civilizations, so it is unlikely you will need this information, but life is unpredictable, so you should memorize it anyway. The first thing to take note of are civilization levels. The first and most basic level is identified by a civilization that has been unable to leave their home world. That is called a ground-level civilization. The next is one that has inhabited all the other planets, or in the process of inhabiting the planets in its solar system, which is identified at the sky level. The next is known as star level, in which a civilization has the means to be able to travel from one star to the next within a reasonably short amount of time. This is varied, as civilizations that are creating their own technology usually have a teething period where travel between stars starts out taking centuries, but eventually gets whittled down to a few decades. But that is not enough to earn the star rank as a civilization. If the average distance between two stars is considered to be 5 light years, then the travel between them must take no longer than 10 years minimum to earn the star rank. The Jotun Empire is one rank higher than that, which is known as the galactic rank. The minimum requirement for that is to be able to travel between two galaxies in a minimum of a century. If you're wondering whether there are levels above even that, then the answer is most definitely yes. What those levels are, even I do not know, so you definitely don't need to worry about it. I won't go into detail about the average civilization rank distribution, as that knowledge won't serve you with any purpose. What you need to know, however, is identify if a given force is neutral or friendly towards you. In the known universe, the qualification for a neutral or friendly force is very difficult to get, with a lot of qualifications that need to be met. Among other requirements, these forces or civilizations must maintain their neutrality to everyone. For friendly forces, they have to have a long history of cooperation and friendly relations with your associated force. Whether a force is neutral or friendly towards you, there is a very simple way to identify either. You can log onto the Henali portal and check the force's affiliation there. As for what the Henali portal is, it's a digital platform with a live connection throughout most of the known universe. A force that claims neutral status without having its status confirmed on the portal is most likely unreliable. There is no real consequence for doing so, but only when its status can be confirmed on the portal will it be completely neutral and trustworthy. Wait, are you saying there's a universe-wide internet? How is that even possible? Lex asked, genuinely shocked. No, not universe-wide. I said it covers most of the known universe, not all of it. That's not to mention that there are clear borders to the unknown, or as yet unexplored, universe. The portal is maintained by all forces that are a part of the Henali Alliance, such as the Jotun Empire. The Empire is responsible for building and maintaining connector planets throughout its territory. How do I log onto the portal? Lex asked curiously. The Earth probably wasn't a part of the portal, but he was definitely interested in checking it out. Since he traveled to multiple planets, there was no doubt he'd get a chance to log on at some point. The first time you log on, it has to be at a registration point. However, once you've finished registration, you can log on using simple verbal commands that will prompt the minimum interface required to use basic functions. The verbal commands will work no matter where you are in the universe, so long as a connection is available. Naturally, the connection can be blocked using technology or formations, otherwise there would be a serious threat of invasion of privacy. For more detailed interactions, you would obviously need to purchase a login device. Those can be anything from a simple smartwatch to an entire body immersive VR chamber. For the purpose of identifying a force's status, the verbal commands should be enough. Still, as dangerous and treacherous as the universe is, some simple safety precautions will get you a long way. Your biggest threat is, and always will be, the demons. At this point, the soldiers wore a terrible grimace and exuded a killing intent so powerful Lex could physically feel it pressing up against his body. It was like a feeling of being submerged in water, but instead of your skin getting wet, it was constantly being pricked by tiny little needles. Lex had to constantly look at himself to ensure he wasn't actually bleeding. If you had been here at the meeting, a few days before the game started, you would have had a chance to see them for yourself. They are nothing but vile, ravenous monsters that want nothing more than to destroy everything they touch and consume anything that has life. But you don't need to take my word for it, every force in the universe is hostile against them. This is a war you have no way of staying away from, even if you want to. The moment you see a demon, you will have to judge if you can fight it. If you can't, then you must run. They will kill you every chance they get. At this point, the soldiers spiraled into a long barrage about the evils of demonic beings, how they were the sin of existence, the bane of all that was pure, etc. etc. The soldier gave Lex a lot of information before he began peddling his propaganda, although Lex agreed that the demons were most likely a threat to most people. But he had seen them obey the devils, not to mention he had seen them become progressively smarter as they grew stronger. There was definitely more to it than what the soldier said, yet Lex had no interest in investigating on his own. He looked forward to the information that would help him grow not only as an individual but also his society. Yet it was nothing more than a lot of rhetoric about helping the whole rather than the individual, the greater good over personal gain, etc. He was honestly expecting more, since they specifically asked for a recruitment stall, but maybe they had their own plans. Lex would watch a replay of things later on to see if they did something he missed, but for now, his interest waned. Little did he know, their original seminar was supposed to be very different. Thanking the soldiers, he left before turning his attention to the devil's stall. He was curious about what they were doing. Maybe he had a bias, but he did not believe for even a second that they did not have any ulterior motives. He also wanted to know their stance on this henali term that kept coming up repeatedly. He tried asking the soldier if it meant or represented something special, but got no real reply. Strolling casually, as if he was watching the different stages and looking for something interesting, he made his way to the devil's stall. As much as he expected this stall to be barren and despondent, it was quite crowded and lively. Humans and beasts alike stood in line, waiting their turn to get an opportunity. There was no way the soldiers would line up, so these humans must be from Earth. They should already have been informed to stay away from the devils, or provided some basic information about what happened at the meeting, but it seemed they did not care. "Hey, what's the deal with this stall?" Lex asked one of the men in line, and received a questioning gaze instead. Once the other man had made sure that Lex was not trying to cut in line, he said, "My brother told me about this place. Apparently, they help you raise your cultivation level. He's already returned back to Earth, and he's getting ready to break into the Foundation realm. Can you believe it?" No, Lex could not believe it. Unlike the man in line who had a huge grin, Lex was frowning. There was no free lunch in the world. The devils must definitely be taking advantage of everyone somehow. He needed to figure out what they were doing immediately, lest they damage the reputation of his inn. Chapter 130 Future Coworkers. Lex's first instinct was to leave and watch a replay of what the devils were doing with his guests. He felt kinda stupid, he should have kept an eye on the devils from the very get-go. Even though he kept it as a priority in his mind, keeping an eye on so many various aspects of the event, it was understandable that Lex overlooked it for a while. But comparing his performance to when he was in the flow definitely shone a light on his shortcomings. Still, he was only human. He would learn from his mistakes. Resisting his urge to watch a replay, Lex decided to continue waiting in line and see things for himself firsthand. Besides, it would seem odd if he left right after being told he could have a breakthrough in his cultivation. Lex waited patiently in line and chatted with the guy. His name was Batsa Acharya and was from a cultivation family in Nepal. Due to suffering from a lack of resources, he and his elder brother joined the ICPA policing the region and, over the course of many years, rose up in ranks. Still, their positions weren't really high enough to be on the list of people who got an invitation to the inn. He was a victim of the classic in the right place at the right time. His boss worked closely with one of the 5 ruling families and got an invitation, and since Batsa was there as well, his boss brought him along. Batsa pulled some strings and brought his brother along as well. Since they were chatting, and Lex was using his Leo persona, he had to introduce himself as well. But that was fine, Lex had already decided on a backstory for Leo. It went a little something like, "I am from Earth," and then provided no more details whatsoever. He avoided talking about himself by talking about random things he liked on Earth, such as movies, games, etc. Eventually, as they chatted, the line moved along until it was Batsa's turn, who went ahead excitedly. Like the other recruitment stall, this one was surrounded by a formation to prevent sound from getting out. But there was no obstruction to sight, and Lex could see Batsa talking with animated excitement with the devils. Speaking of devils, Lex turned his attention to the two but did not recognize them. These must be different from the ones that came in the first party. It was unfortunate that Lex could not view their statuses since he was not wearing the host attire. Although it was irritating that so many of his abilities in the inn were linked to the suit, it made sense from a logical standpoint. Lex's own individual cultivation was weak, and so to use abilities that came with a higher cultivation, he would need an intermediary. Rather than saying it was unfortunate that he needed the suit to use the inn powers completely, it should be said he was lucky to get the suit in the first place. The only reason the suit had any power at all to begin with was because it was tapping into the system's control over the inn's territory to give Lex those abilities. It was a good beginner's item as without it, Lex would not have performed nearly as well. Turning his attention back to the devils, he noticed that these two looked particularly young. On Earth, they would have qualified as teenagers, at most. Cultivation slowing down aging made it difficult to guess their actual age, but Lex bet they were relatively very young. The only alternative was that their cultivation was very, very high, and that seemed unlikely. One of the devils had two saber-tooth-like fangs sticking out of his mouth that extended even below his chin. His hair was golden brown, and with his fair skin and green eyes, a good description of him was devilishly handsome. The other devil looked like he could actually be human, one of those humans who joined hardcore gangs, covered his skin in various tattoos and even tattooed the whites of his eyes black, but human nonetheless. The tattoos that covered this devil's skin seemed to be some kind of writing Lex did not recognize. It was unfortunate that his universal translator was limited to speech and not writing, but he could purchase one of those for himself later. When Batsa was finished, he directly teleported out of the inn, impatient to begin his cultivation no doubt. There was no doubt that the various shows were interesting, but they meant little to Batsa. Quickly forgetting about his new Nepali friend, Lex looked towards the devils, who were patiently waiting for him. It was strange. Not that he was the kind of guy who judged a book by its cover, but the devils really did not look like they would have a demure demeanor. Yet they welcomed him with bright, albeit scary-looking, smiles as he walked up to them. "Hello, I was told you were helping people break through in their cultivation here," Lex said, putting on his best innocent face. He had decided that Leo's personality would be a happy-go-lucky, naive and innocent one. That would make it easy for him to broach difficult subjects and ask questions people would rather avoid. For a short moment, he considered making Leo's personality very secretive and hidden, so no one would ever be able to discern what his true intentions were as he secretly controlled things behind the scenes. It was only for a moment, though. He did not have the patience or the temperament to do that kind of thing, nor was he such a good actor. Simple and straightforward would work best for him. "Quick to the chase, huh?" the devil with the dark eyes said, chuckling. "Indeed, we're helping those we come across. But whether you can achieve a breakthrough or not is entirely up to you. We are simply giving out gifts to celebrate our first meeting. An introductory gift, if you will." "First meeting? Are you planning another meeting?" "Yes, the environment is very enjoyable here. We've decided to come to the inn often to relax, life can be stressful, you know. And because of the reputation of devils, it's not easy to make new friends. So we thought about giving out gifts. Everyone likes gifts, right? By the way, my name is Creel. And my name is Azure," said the devil with saber-tooth fangs. "Oh, right. My name is Leo. I should have introduced myself first." "Leo? You wouldn't happen to be the Leo that runs the gamer's den, would you?" asked Creel. "Indeed, the one and the same. I'm surprised you recognized me." "Haha, naturally we did," Creel said, becoming more animated all of a sudden. He truly looked like he was over the moon at meeting Leo. "I told you, we really enjoyed the inn. We've met all the others from the inn. Harry's promised to give me a haircut when his cultivation increases. His cultivation was dependent on his soul, so for our meeting gift we gave him a little something to help his soul. He was really excited about that." "John," Creel gave out a defeated smile. He was not so excited about the gifts and didn't seem to want to be friends. "It is truly unfortunate. Still, although we did not get a chance to meet before, we heard your name from Z. It is truly a pleasure to meet you." "Likewise. I like making friends, let me know whenever you come by. Or if I'm not around, which is most of the time unfortunately, you can leave a message with Z. I would love to learn more about the devils. Likewise, I would love to chat with you some more. I'm very interested in learning how you became an employee. Who knows, maybe in the future we could be co-workers. Unfortunately, I can't spend too much time right now. The line is quite long," he said, pointing towards the guests waiting in line behind Lex. "Who knows, I don't mind more co-workers, but you have to get the innkeeper's approval. I'll bet that's not easy to do. But we can discuss that later. Tell me, what kind of gift would you like?" This gift was one Lex would not miss out on, as he wanted to test it for potential traps. "I need stuff to strengthen my soul as well. I've even put a commission for it in the guild room. So if you have any more of the stuff you gave to Harry, something along those lines would be great." Creel smiled, and with a wave of his hand, an opaque bottle appeared in the air. "Drink this all in one go. It'll put you to sleep for some time, but when you wake up, your soul should be stronger." "Thank you very much. Let me know when you have free time. I'm looking forward to seeing you again." Likewise. Their conversation ended with that pleasant exchange, but as Lex turned to leave, his previous smile disappeared and he stared at the bottle heatedly, the exact look that the devils were giving him. Lex didn't know this, but his conversation had prompted the devils into thinking that a requirement to become an employee at the inn was a strong soul. They started analyzing this little detail to the best of their efforts, trying to look into what it could mean. None of them expected that it was a simple misunderstanding. Chapter 131 Beasts Take the Stage. Lex walked away quickly, showing excitement on his face. As much as he wanted to disappear immediately, it occurred to him that he had spent too little time as Leo since this persona was created. The same way the devils learned of his name from Z, others might take notice of his quick patterns of appearance and disappearance. Of course, that alone would not be enough to give rise to suspicion about Leo being a fake persona. Still, Lex believed he should be a little proactive and create a solid background for Leo a little at a time. He needed to spend a little more time with his co-workers, the way Harry and John seemed to have developed a relationship. That could wait for now, yet he really should at least check up on Z. The poor kid must have been working hard in his absence. True to his expectations, Z was hard at work convincing people to leave him alone. As usual, the computers in the store were mostly unused, while the AR rooms were fully booked. Z was trying to convince a horde of aunties that he would not make a good boyfriend for their daughters or granddaughters and that he simply just wanted to be lazy. Yet the more he refused, the more adamant they became in their choice. Lex let out a genuine smile and decided he would meet Z another time. He disappeared, returning to his apartment. His little feel-good moment was over, it was now time to focus on the real task at hand. He stared at the opaque bottle, trying to discern anything. Of course, with his distinct lack of cultivation, he would learn nothing new about the bottle. He put on his suit and prepared to use a loophole he had discovered to learn the details of this bottle. Unlike with guests, he could not analyze items and identify their properties. Yet what he could do was put his belongings into the gift shop for sale. As soon as he entered an item in the gift shop, a description of that item would appear. All he needed to do was add the bottle to the shop to learn about its properties. This was a little something he discovered after Mary told him to start looking for loopholes. He was a little proud of himself when he did. Truth be told, he did not anticipate anything harmful in the bottle or the other gifts the devils had handed out. This was because should such a thing happen, the system would warn him the same way it had warned him about devils putting trackers on his guests. But he needed to identify what their goal was, and any little bit of information would help. Lex added the bottle to the gift shop, read its description and quickly removed it. As he suspected, there was no tampering with the item. Its description was purified wraith's blood. The purified blood of a wraith. In this purified form, it has a soothing effect on the soul by strengthening the cohesiveness of the body. Only effective for cultivators below the foundation realm. Lex set the bottle aside for later and decided to keep a close eye on the devils. It was likely that, because they recognized him, their interaction with him was different from the one they had with other guests. He watched a replay of their interactions with a few different guests, and indeed there was a small detail they had missed out on when talking to him. They told all of their guests they will return to the inn every 100 days or so if they were interested in meeting again they can time it accordingly. Every 100 days signified a dedicated, strategic plan. The devils definitely had some kind of ulterior motives. Lex would have to watch out. They mentioned wanting to join the inn, maybe that was their end goal. Either way, that was a matter for later. He turned his attention back to the various performances and looked for the stages with the largest crowds. He immediately picked out a pattern, whether the performers were earthlings, soldiers or beasts, the stages where they were playing music gathered the largest crowds. Maybe it was because such a thing was easier to appreciate and didn't require the level of attention the snake's performance did, or maybe there was a greater hidden secret to the matter. Either way, they were the most popular. For earthlings, the music they played was not that of bands or popular songs, but cultural music from unusual or lesser-known instruments. He listened to each one, taking in their unique charm. It was as if each instrument had a personality. The bagpipes, because of course there were bagpipes, were like loud and boisterous children, laughing and playing in the open, sharing their joy with everyone. Lex personally did not understand why people enjoyed listening to it, but he could certainly admit it was great to set a mood. There were a few different kinds of unusually massive guitars. Lex could not identify what they were or what was special about them. He was not trained in music theory, but it sounded nice enough to gather crowds, and that's what mattered. He recognized the zither, but only because he'd seen it mentioned in so many novels. It sounded nice, but not as soul-shakingly beautiful as it had been described in the novels. Of course, in the novels, the instrument was also always being played by a devastatingly beautiful girl who, often enough, ended up being the protagonist's love interest. Just to be safe, Lex decided to keep a distance from the bearded old man who was playing the instrument. There were a few different variations on drums as well. There was one particular one that was being played by hand instead of sticks, which had a rhythm and tempo the others could not match. The man playing the drums by hand also happened to be a cultivator, much like the ballerina, so it made sense that his craft seemed better than the rest. Yet out of all the various musical performances, once again, Lex's favorite was the one being performed by beasts. On a particular stage, birds sat in organized rows and sang in a coordination that would put symphonies to shame. Parrots, mockingbirds, ravens, blue jays and many more different kinds of birds Lex either did not know the names of or had never seen before combined their voices together to produce music that was so sweet and pure to listen to. Lex closed his eyes and let himself be swept away by the sounds. It was filled with a freshness and vitality that was hard to explain. It was like the first gust of wind in the early morning after a night of rain, like the soft tickle of dew felt on bare feet. It felt like a deep breath of fresh mountain air, chilly enough to wake you up but not enough to cause you to tremble. Lex enjoyed the music for an unexpectedly long time. Prior to this, he was confident that the humans would have this competition in the bag, but suddenly he wasn't so sure. Still, there were many other stages to visit and Lex went through them one by one. He saw Igashima's display, the tree that needed time to prepare. His stage was covered in soil, out of which grew a field of flowers. In the center stood the tree, tall and firm, overlooking its children. The flowers bloomed and waned in a wave, traveling from one corner to another. Each flower lived just long enough to let out its beautiful smell, which, when combined with the smells of the other flowers, made Lex feel a freshness entirely different from the ones the birds made him feel. It was so unusual, Lex had never used his sense of smell so much and so consistently without losing the ability to distinguish smells. Yet here it was, happening clearly and with direction. Even without the smell, watching the flowers move in such an organized way was already entertaining, yet the smells only elevated the performance. This was most likely another strong contender. He viewed the other performances, each one unique and interesting in their own way. He could not say for his guests, maybe they would enjoy a different kind of entertainment, but Lex thoroughly enjoyed himself. He felt like this was the perfect activity for a vacation. It was not strenuous, yet was interesting and exciting enough to keep him captivated. There was no doubt that a lot of them were waiting for the second portion of the games, however. As enjoyable as these performances were, there was always a crowd ready to watch the excitement of battle. With that, the day slowly passed and the first part of the cultural event came to a close. The guests could sleep here, or they could return to their planet, as the next portion would only begin in the morning. Chapter 132 The Small Family. As the day came to a close, most people returned to their planets. Still, with only a few of them choosing to stay at the inn, there were a couple hundred people roaming the grounds. The usual peaceful atmosphere was still full of the buzz of many conversations taking place at the same time. The seats at the restaurant were full and so were the garden chairs outside. Most people who wanted to eat did so in their rooms or in the Colosseum, simply because they had nowhere else to sit. As proud as Lex was of everything he had done, and as much as he was growing the inn, it was not ready to facilitate hundreds of people at once, let alone thousands. It was also not conducive to the beasts, as he could shrink their size to make them fit in, but he wanted to make facilities that would allow them to stay their own size comfortably. This was a stark reminder for him that, even with the millions he had earned and spent, the inn wasn't as developed as it could be. Realistically speaking, any decent hotel in a normal city could accommodate more people than his inn could comfortably. He always needed to be thinking of ways in which he could improve. As he watched the hundreds of people, some of whom were simply sitting in the grass, having a picnic, he decided to take notes on things to improve. This event was like a round of testing for a new app, so that flaws could be determined and fixed. Firstly, he needed more places to sit. But he needed to be creative with his solution, as he didn't want a giant structure that would be empty and useless at any time he had fewer guests. Of course, maybe there would come a time where he constantly had a lot of guests, in which case his giant structure would always be in use. Yet in his heart, Lex wanted the manor to remain unchanged. He did not want to increase its size to accommodate the growing number of guests. There was another solution to this. Maybe he could leave the manor as is and build larger structures somewhere far away. This way, he could use the manor or guests with a high enough prestige level, or he could only take the guests he really liked there. But for that he would need to expand the size of the Midnight World as well. Midnight World, that's what he decided to call the separate realm or space his inn resided in, as he couldn't just keep referring to them as the grounds or the hills or even the inn. Next, if the inn really was supposed to be a vacation spot, he needed to add more activities. Even on vacation, if a person did not have anything to do for an extended period of time, they would get bored. Right now, if a guest wanted to go swimming, the only option they had was the tiny lake near the recovery room. Considering the size of the lake, it was not a good option. Fortunately, all was not lost. At least he had improved options in terms of food by adding the spiritual food, which was a big hit amongst the Earthlings. The soldiers were used to farm spiritual food, so they treated it as usual and ate it casually, while Nibiru was an extremely vibrant world that gave birth to many spiritual plants and vegetables. For the beasts, it was also ordinary. For the earthlings, it was an amazing delicacy that not only tasted phenomenal, it aided their health and cultivation. Either way, whether it was maintaining a high standard or providing an out-of-reach service, for different guests the spiritual food had accomplished different kinds of success, and Lex was happy with that. This was an independent happiness that Lex felt, aside from the 12,333 MP Lex had made from the food. Not to mention, he had sold 10 of his midnight in suits, netting him another 90,000 MP. He also earned another 7,000 MP from selling more commemorative coins and 7,000 MP from his various services. This brought his new total to 212,733 MP. He looked into why his income from the various services was the least and quickly came to a conclusion. Whether it was the meditation room, training room, mystery trial, barber shop or battle axe, they could only provide service to one person at a time. It was already a big deal to earn so much. With those rooms, the way to earn more was to have more of them to cater to multiple guests rather than increase their prices. Adding multiple of those would also make the place more crowded, but he did not mind expanding Main Street. After all, that was the whole point of putting everything together. Lex was constantly scanning the inn, checking on all his guests, when he spotted something in the recovery room. Marlowe, who had lost access to the meditation room when he briefly visited Earth, was standing inside a particular recovery pod room with another woman, looking down at the person in the pod. They were both staring silently, and continued to do so as long as Lex watched. A quick rewind showed Lex that they had been that way for a few days now. Occasionally, Marlowe left to go into a recovery pod himself, so his body's condition still wasn't stabilized, but would promptly return once he was good enough. Curious about the situation, Lex checked the woman's status. Name, Sofia Ramos/Bravi. Age, 60. Sex, female. Cultivation details, golden core mid. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, that is one emotional lady. Do not approach her in Crocs, mismatched socks or smelling like food. Lex was slightly confused about why her name had a slash in it, but suddenly understood that this was Marlowe's wife. Larry had told him rumors about her relationship with the madman, but it seemed there was more to it. Lex checked the status of the person in the recovery pod. Name, Rafael Carter Bravi. Age, 37. Sex, male. Cultivation details, crippled. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Condition. The patient's body is extremely damaged. The patient suffers from hundreds of hairline fractures, amputated limbs, torn muscles and ligaments, a missing lung, failing kidneys, failing liver, severely damaged spine, fractured skull, severe brain damage, missing teeth, missing eyes, missing nose and a severely atrophied soul. It would be impossible to keep the patient alive with only the recovery pod, but an unidentifiable source of vitality has been detected in the patient's heart, the only organ completely undamaged. Assuming the vitality is continuously produced, it would take the patient 3 weeks and 4 days to reach optimum health in the recovery pod. Further treatment via ORR, organic reconstruction room, is then recommended. The soul will require treatment, but no such facility is currently available at the inn. Please figure out the necessary treatment on your own. Remarks, if it is one's destiny to die, the universe itself cannot stop it. If one is destined to live, then the universe itself will bend itself around you to provide the conditions for you to live. Lex was startled when he read the status. This was clearly Marlowe's son. He had never heard of Marlowe having a kid, let alone one that was in such a bad condition. Maybe this was the reason why he and his wife had such a bad falling out. It was also the first time he got a recommendation for the ORR. So far, he hadn't even set a price for that, as no guest had used it. That was because, for it to be usable, the patient's cultivation had to be below Lex's. Since Raphael's cultivation was crippled, he was technically below Lex. For a moment, Lex hesitated. Considering his relationship with Marlowe, he felt he should go say something. Or at least, he should let him know about the ORR. Yet at the same time, he felt awkward approaching the man in such a situation. Finally, after letting out an exhausted sigh, Lex decided to go talk to the couple. The longer he waited, the more awkward he would become. Teleporting right outside the recovery pod room, Lex knocked. The sound startled the couple, as for the duration of their stay, no one had interrupted them. Marlowe opened the door and felt a strange kind of relief when he saw the innkeeper. Innkeeper, he greeted with a nod, his voice low and absent of his usual energy. Marlowe, Lex acknowledged the man with a corresponding nod. Please come in. This is my wife, Sophia. Sophia, this is the innkeeper that I was telling you about. Hello, she said simply, her gaze quickly returning to her son. I noticed you've spent the last few days here, so I thought I'd come in and check on the patient myself. I have some good news for you as well as some bad news for you. What would you like to hear first? Chapter 133 What happened? Upon mention of checking in on the patient, the couple's necks snapped towards the innkeeper with the speed and ferocity of a fired bullet. They had been in close communication with Nurse Jubilation since they appeared, but she could not provide them with any information. Truth be told, Sophia was very hesitant to bring her son here in the first place. His condition was extremely fragile and had been preserved using special means in her Ramos family. Unlike her, a cultivation and battle maniac, her family's area of influence was in herbs and medicine. They were one of the most prominent families, if not the most prominent family, when it came to refining medicine to aid in cultivation. In their oldest and most secretive plantation grew a tree so old that it surpassed any historical records. It was an average-sized tree and looked no different from a regular pine tree. One could not sense any spiritual energy from it, nor could they detect any anomaly. Combined with the fact that it was in a forest, its speciality was almost undetectable. It was only by accident that the Ramos family had discovered its use, and then slowly discovered its peculiarity. The pine cones from that tree could be removed, and then replaced with any kind of plant or herb, and the tree would nurture it endlessly. A normal plant would gain spiritual effects in only a few weeks, and spiritual plants would be strengthened in only a few months. The affinity, type or requirements of the plants seemed to be completely irrelevant, as that tree would nurture them all. This was a closely guarded secret of her family, and even its code name was simple, pine tree, to avoid arousing curiosity to anyone who might one day steal or stumble upon confidential documents. While Sophia herself had no knowledge or interest in medicinal matters, her parents were another matter. Therefore, when Raphael was injured, they were able to react immediately. Using a special technique, they wrapped the then young man in a hemp bandage and coated his skin with an artificial sap. Then, treating him like a plant, they attached him to the tree. Like this, the boy had continued to live for almost 15 years. But he had only continued to live, he was not healing. So when a few days ago Marlowe returned and claimed he had discovered a way to heal their son, she was desperate to believe him, but she did not dare to hope. If they removed him from the tree, it was unknown if he would live long enough to go anywhere. He may as well die within a few minutes. Filled with her built-up rage, frustration and desperation, she attacked Marlowe with a ferocity she had never before revealed. After letting her vent a little, Marlowe finally used his strength to stop her. He did not have time to waste, as not only was his own body's condition unstable, he knew full well that the situation on Earth was rapidly deteriorating. As much as he wanted her to understand reason and come with him willingly, he would have to force things until they reached the inn. With strength that far surpassed anything he had before, Marlowe controlled his wife and traveled to Spain in the fastest jet he had. Once there, he brought her directly to the tree. At this point, she had stopped struggling and was only filled with a desperate prayer in her heart that what Marlowe said was true. Removing Raphael from the tree would endanger his life, which was a decision she, as a mother, simply could not take. As much as she knew that this was not a solution, as much as she knew that Marlowe would not joke about such things, she could not make herself do it. Ultimately, all she could do was watch as Marlowe did everything. Marlowe removed the artificial fruit and revealed his son's body. He did not stop to look at it, to reminisce or feel sorrow or pity. He directly poured a bottle of Bottlum's Dew down the kid's throat and used a golden key, transporting the three of them to the inn. Everything after that had been very uneventful so far. While Raphael did not die immediately, like Sophia suspected he would, despite being in the recovery pod he did not seem to be getting better. Wasn't this only slightly different from how things were before? During this time Marlowe had explained to her what the inn was, as well as what he knew about the innkeeper. Which is why his arrival, along with him saying that he had some news about the patient, immediately attracted her attention. The good news, Sophia said immediately. Lex smiled, as even without the need for the suit, he could feel her motherly love. The good news is that in 3 weeks and 4 days, the patient will be completely healed. After that, you can take him to the organic reconstruction room, where he will be able to regrow his missing limbs. Elation and happiness hit Sophia like a tsunami. She chose to blindly accept what the man said, despite it being against common sense. Considering Raphael's condition, how could he possibly be healed so quickly, if at all? In truth, this was not quick at all. It must be remembered that even Marlowe, a golden core cultivator, healed much quicker than that. The fact that it would take 3 weeks was a true testament to how devastatingly injured the boy was. In fact, his status had clearly stated that without the aid of whatever it was in his heart that kept him alive, the recovery pod would not be able to heal him at all. Sophia was desperate for any kind of good news, which is why she gladly accepted it, but Marlowe frowned. If, after 3 weeks, his son would be healed, why was there still some bad news? And what about the bad news? Marlowe asked heavily. The bad news is that the patient's injury exceeds just his body. His soul has atrophied, and will require treatment as well, otherwise even when he is healed, he will not wake up. Unfortunately, at the moment, the inn does not have the facility to heal the soul. From her newfound zenith, Sophia quickly fell to her nadir. Belonging to a family focused on medicine, she knew exactly how difficult it was healing injuries to the soul. Simply put, her family had never actually succeeded in aiding anyone with a damaged soul. Resources that could affect the soul were practically non-existent. You said, at the moment. Does that mean you could get something to heal the soul later? 3 weeks is a long time. It is entirely possible that such a facility may be available by then. Even if not by then, down the line, getting something like is highly likely. Of course, if you do not wish to wait, you can put up a request for treasures or medicine that heals the soul in the guild room. You can pay in unique treasures or simply MP, and just wait for another guest to fulfill the request. You could also look for such treasures on your own in your own world. This is not a dead end, just another hurdle that you must face. How long it takes to overcome such a hurdle is the only thing that remains a question. The parents felt a wave of relief mixed with distress hit them. Raphael's injury had truly weighed on them for a long, long time. Now that an end to their undesired journey was in sight, they became even more impatient, yet could not allow themselves to make a mistake. If you don't mind me asking, do you know how the patient was injured to such a degree? I'm afraid if it wasn't for the artifact in the patient's heart, even the recovery pod would not be able to keep him alive, let alone heal him. His question was multifaceted. Firstly, he was curious about what actually happened to Raphael and how exactly he managed to live after getting injured so horribly. Even his soul was seriously damaged, so it could not have been something simple. Secondly, he was curious about what the artifact was in his heart that could keep him alive. If Lex could find something like that for himself, it would aid him greatly in case he ever got injured. Yet their immediate response told Lex that the couple knew nothing about the artifact as they looked at each other with confused yet questioning gazes. Finally, Marlowe let out a sigh and said, "Come, let's take a walk. I'll tell you about my son." Leaving Sophia to watch over Raphael, the two silently walked out of the room. There were a few moments where Marlowe let sorrow show on his face, but he quickly controlled himself and brought himself back to normal. He wasn't exactly in his mischievous state, but anyone who looked at him would not be able to tell that this was a grieving father. Chapter 134A Mission. Marlowe and Lex continued to walk in silence. The soft buzz of the various crowds in the distance was a nice change to the usual serenity of the inn, and it lightened the mood considerably. This was a good thing, in Lex's opinion, as the situation was not hopeless. With time, Raphael would eventually be healed even of his soul injuries. Lex had no doubt that if he continued to upgrade his recovery room, a feature to heal the soul would eventually show up. In fact, he was even certain that somewhere down the line, he would acquire a way to heal Raphael's crippled cultivation. That was not to say he would immediately return to his previous power, but that he would regain the ability to cultivate. Having one's cultivation crippled was a strange thing, similar to Marlowe's crippled golden core. Even those below the golden core who had their cultivation crippled would not be able to cultivate ordinarily, even if their body healed completely. Lex did not know or understand the reason behind this, but that's just the way things were. Eventually the two reached the hills where the meditation room was located. Compared to the rest of the midnight world, there were fewer people here. The night sky, lit with sky lanterns, made it seem like the stars were hanging just overhead. It made one feel like if one reached out their hand, they might just be able to capture it. But of course, it just seemed like that. Even the avian beasts present in the midnight world would be kept from touching them, just for safety purposes. Raphael was born just a couple years after we got married, Marlowe said suddenly, his voice deep and somber. He was a chubby little kid, and would play with just about anyone who would give him any attention. All his life, his mother spoiled him way too much. I was also approaching my peak back then, and combined with my family's background and Sophia's, there was no one who didn't try to fawn on him. Compared to the life I had lived, filled with pain and struggle and non-stop fighting, his life was too cushy. Maybe I should have been happy that I had managed to protect my son from suffering like I had, but back then all I could think of was that if he lived like this, he would grow up to be weak. So, I pushed him hard. From an early age, I started training his body. I started embedding discipline into his very bones. I treated him like a soldier, not like a son. To optimize the development of his muscles, I put the kid through medical baths. Too much strain on his bones would be bad at an early age, so I had him practice yoga to increase his muscle flexibility as I gave him combat training. He was 7 years old when I made him kill his first human. At this point, Marlowe went silent again. He did not look sad or regretful, and his voice was steady. One would assume he was talking about something non-consequential, like buying shoes. Only he himself knew how much anguish he suffered. I made many mistakes in raising him, but the worst of it was comparing his life to my own. At each level, at each achievement, at each breakthrough, I would tell him that I had it much worse than him when I was his age, yet had far more achievements. I was not trying to tear him down. All I meant was that he had better facilities than I did, so that he could surpass me. More than anything, I wanted him to be better than I ever was. More than anything, I wanted him to be more successful than me. The kid was good. He took everything I threw at him and worked hard to overcome every challenge. But at some point, I don't even know when, his personality changed. He went from being that happy, friendly kid to someone desperate. He was training desperately, working desperately, searching desperately for anything that would make him good enough. Instead of training him, showing him how he could be great, all I did was constantly remind him that he was not as good as me at his age. Another bout of silence came, this time hanging between the two men longer. Marlowe was completely stoic. Someone who did not know him would assume he was completely fine, yet anyone who knew Marlowe's regular personality would understand just how unordinary this was. Many years later, when I heard the Morrison family was training their heir crazily, I forced them to accept me as one of his teachers. Instead of pushing him forcefully, I taught the kid at every level how he should be thinking, how he should overcome each challenge, and how he should view the world. I could not let someone else make the same mistakes I did. Although the kid was training at a level beyond what anyone his age should be doing, he ever developed the same desperation that Raphael did. All because of a simple choice, the choice to quit whenever he wanted. That simple choice turned everything that was happening from something that was being forced upon him, to something he chose to do. Every time he overcame an obstacle, it was a result of his own training. Every time he completed a mission, it was his own success rather than his family's. Every time he felt overwhelmed, it was his own choice to continue rather than something that was forced upon him. Such a small difference, to be honest, brought about such a tremendous change. Instead of becoming desperate like Raphael, the kid has grown into a confident young man, because everything he did was something he chose to do to better himself, rather than something his family chose for him. If only I had done the same with my own kid. Back then I didn't see the problem, but I warped his personality. I wish I could say that the reason Raphael is in his current condition is because an enemy of mine attacked him, or he was ambushed, or something evil happened. Yet the simple truth is, he forced himself to cultivate too hard. He pushed himself beyond his body's limits. In his early 20s, he was about to break into the Foundation realm. It can't compare with that Alexander kid, but then again, he never had the same amount of resources either. But he forced the breakthrough before he was ready, which caused the spiritual energy inside his body to destabilize and explode. Back on Earth, cultivation techniques are tested for their stability, to ensure their chances of deviation are minimum, but it's impossible to eliminate them. His poor state of mind, his desperation to succeed, all led him down this path. Sophia and I weren't home when this happened, but fortunately, his grandparents were. They managed to keep him alive, but that's about all they could do. It was impossible to treat him. Sophia blamed me. She said I killed her son by pushing him too hard. To be frank, I can't honestly say she is wrong. You know, when I think back to that time, I can't remember what the rush was. I can't remember why I was in such a hurry to have him grow stronger so quickly. We had all the time in the world. Instead of pushing him to be as miserable as I was, I should have been teaching him how to live. Instead of having him kill people, I should have been teaching him how to defend himself and live the life he wanted to live. I can't remember. As Marlowe vented his feelings, Lex said nothing. He was not sure what he should be saying anyway, and he was not tactless enough to ask him about the artifact again while he was telling him about his son. But this did reveal to Lex another question he had been wondering about. It always felt peculiar to him, a multimillionaire high-leveled cultivator spending his time teaching self-defense class to a bunch of nobodies. But suddenly, Lex understood. Through them, Marlowe was trying to relieve some of his guilt. He was doing for them what he wished he had done for his son. By teaching them to survive, he was giving them enough time to live long enough to actually enjoy their lives. From his expression, one could not tell that the mad giant was in pain, but if one analyzed his actions it was plain as day. As for the artifact, Marlowe continued, I have no idea what you are talking about. As much as I wished it was something I gave him, neither I nor Sophia have any treasures that would allow someone to continue to live in such a beaten-up state. It's something we can only ask him once I find a way to heal his soul, Marlowe said, with unwavering determination. There was no pain in his voice, no regret in his eyes. There was only a mission. Chapter 135 Qualifying Rounds. Marlowe and Lex did not talk much after that. He simply escorted the former giant to the guild room and showed him how he could put up requests. Marlowe directly put up several requests. from information about the soul and soul-related items, to treasures and medicine that could aid in the healing of the soul. At some point after they left, one of the devils stumbled into the guild room and saw the various quests related to souls. This only increased their confidence that the innkeeper or his subordinates were greatly interested in the soul. He passed their information back to his superiors, who started making various plans. Just like that, the night passed quietly and quickly. Most of the guests had no need for sleep in the short term due to their cultivation, and thus spent the entire night awake. Some of them enjoyed picnics, some of them stargazed, some of them waited for their turn in the battle acts of the mystery trials. Those last two had quickly become the most popular attractions of the inn. Most guests from Earth, however, spent the night in their rooms, cultivating. The rooms did not have the amplification effect of the meditation room, yet for the Earthlings cultivating here was already amplified enough. In a single night there had been various breakthroughs in minor and major realms. Lex himself stayed awake for quite a while. For some reason, he found it very peaceful watching his guests enjoy themselves at his inn. No, he was not awakening his inner voyeur. It filled him with a sense of pride and accomplishment that people were enjoying his hard work. Eventually, though, he went back to his room to sleep for a few hours. He could, of course, continue to stay awake and he would still be fine the next day, but there was no reason not to be well rested. Early in the morning, Lex woke up and checked on all the winners for the qualifying round. There were 10 qualifiers, but he learned that one of them, the ballerina he had seen yesterday, had dropped out for some reason and so only 9 were left. Of the 9, Lex had already seen a few. The orchestra of birds was included, naturally, along with Ijashima's display. The last performance to be included into the qualifiers was by a single, unusual beast that Lex must have missed. Its body's shape was like that of a jaguar, yet its body was made out of a silverish liquid. Every time it moved it felt like looking at water moving in a sealed bottle. Lex must have missed this performance, and was quite interested in it. He had never seen something like that. He was so intrigued he even checked its status. Name, Resin. Age, 1. Sex. Cultivation details, initial foundation realm. Species, Mercury Glibin. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, extremely, extremely toxic. Do not touch or date, under any circumstances. Lex raised an eyebrow as he wondered if this beast was actually made out of mercury, or was that just a name. Whatever the case, since it managed to be a finalist, he was sure it would put on a good performance. Other than the beasts, there was one other qualifier that was composed of 2 soldiers, while the remaining qualifiers were all from Earth. Lex honestly did not know whether to be surprised or not when he recognized one of Earth's finalists as a YouTuber. She was a... Lex almost blushed when he recalled the first ever remark he got from the system about his YouTube history. She was an ASMR artist but also had another channel where was a solo vocalist and did covers for songs. Lex had never heard her covers. Lex quickly gathered his thoughts and began preparing for the qualifying rounds. He needed to step up on the sales and earn more MP before the next round began. There was a reason for this. Due to his unexpectedly high cost for his bodyguard, he had actually not finished paying for the combat portion of the games. This was the real reason he was so focused on selling merchandise. As of now, he had enough to ensure that the games would actually happen, but considering that Mary told him he needed to ace this quest, he wanted to go all in. The more MP he had to spend, the better he could make it out to be. During the night, he had sold 3 more suits and made another 3,000 MP from the battle axe alone. The rest of the services and the coins, along with the items from the gift shop, generated 4,000 MP, making his overnight total to be 34,000 MP. That brought his total to 249,733 MP. By the end of the day, he should have crossed 250,000 MP, which was his minimum requirement. It was unlikely, but if he sold enough suits and brought his total up to 500,000 MP, then that would be ideal. Something that must be noted was that the 3 suit purchases last night were not from humans, but beasts who were impressed by Little Blue's own suit. Somewhere around the inn, 3 rams were walking around wearing a suit. At 9 a.m., fireworks went off at the Colosseum, letting the guests know that the event was about to begin. Many of the guests came, but most watched the event from their rooms. This time, each performance would happen one at a time to let everyone appreciate them completely. As such, they didn't need to be at the Colosseum and watched in the comfort of their privacy. Soon the event began. The birds gave the first performance, and their light but sweet voice was a refreshing way to begin the day. Most of the guests enjoyed the performance thoroughly, and since they performed a new music piece this time, even those who had already seen them before were entertained. The birds were followed by the duo of soldiers. They wore some dress that Lex assumed was traditional to where they were from, but on Earth was recognized as a sundress most commonly worn by women during the summer. Their performance, despite their unusual image to the Earthlings, was genuinely entertaining despite being simple. They were fighting. Each held a massive and unwieldy-looking blade and clashed head-on. It was a display of unfettered strength, yet at the same time, had the elegance of a sophisticated dance. As far as Lex could tell, this was not a rehearsed skit. They were genuinely fighting, and often, genuinely getting hurt. Massive cuts and gashes were carved into their bodies, but their traditional dress quickly wrapped itself around each wound, preventing it from bleeding. As the performance progressed, the dress went from looking like a sundress to skin-tight sportswear. The two soldiers had the ability to dodge or block, but they didn't do that. Each attack was met only with another attack, and the one with greater strength or technique would come out as the winner. Eventually, the show came to a close when one of the soldiers could no longer hold on to the blade and it went flying away. Contrary to other performances Lex had seen, this was not pleasurably entertaining but thrilling instead. It received loud applause despite its simplicity and received greater crowd engagement than Lex had seen before. The next performance was Igashima's. Like before, his performance was filled with a lot of visual stimulation. The colors of various flowers as they moved and aged melded with one another to give birth to a living, moving piece of art. That, along with its stimulation of the sense of smell, gave a performance that many members of the audience enjoyed. Unfortunately, it was not as engaging as the soldiers, so this was likely the tree's end in the performances. Next was the YouTuber. Hers was a very simple performance. She sat on a stool at center stage and sang softly. There was no accompanying music, just her voice as she sang her own version of Hallelujah. As simple and straightforward as it was, Lex had to admit that he was surprised by how much he enjoyed it. He doubted that she would win the competition, but there was no question about the fact that she would gain many fans today. In fact, a part of him wondered if he should hire her as a singer for the inn. Her singing, along with live music, would really create a special ambience at the restaurant. That was followed by another performance by the Earthlings. It was a band. They played a few songs, and the insanely quick tempo and rhythm of the drummer as well as the masterful performance of the guitarist who was playing an electric guitar won the praise of much of the audience, even the beasts. After that came Resin, the liquid jaguar. Lex himself was very interested in seeing just what this unique beast would do. Chapter 136 Right out of an anime. When the performance began, there was not much to it. Resin walked around the stage in circles, the liquid that made up his body bobbing back and forth as if in an invisible container. One moment it was as if it had a complete head, but as the liquid receded, it seemed as if it was just a neck. The liquid did not spill, nor did it move around outside the clear border that defined the jaguar's shape. Had the jaguar not been moving, Lex could have mistaken it for the most clear glass container. Yet it was moving, and as it slowly picked up the pace the liquid started moving even more violently. Suddenly Resin let out a roar and leaped into the air, its liquid body quickly changing shape to that of a sparrow. The now bird glided through the air in an elegant display, before flapping its wings right before it hit the stage. With each flap, Resin changed into the shape of a different bird, flying higher with increasing speed. When Resin reached its crescendo, it changed to the shape of a human and dove like a swimmer about to enter the water. Right before it hit the stage floor, it changed shape again and turned into a snake, slithering onto the ground. Resin continued its performance for a few minutes more, entertaining the guests as it switched form. The few beasts watching were intrigued while most of the humans watched it as a spectacle. Ragnar and his followers, however, looked on with a grave look in their eyes. In front of Ragnar were a few reports, some containing the information his soldiers were able to collect about Nibiru, while the rest were about the Midnight Inn. There was a distinct lack of reports on Earth in the pile. Both had interesting information, but right now, Ragnar was concerned with the reports on Nibiru. At first, he had thought that Nibiru was just another planet that was heavily populated with beasts. It was not unusual, and considering that the definition of beasts used by humans included most non-humanoid or insectoid living creatures, they were some of the most common kinds of planets that supported life in the universe. But quickly, an anomaly was spotted. Since the beasts were not unified and did not have the concept of keeping matters confidential, any person who was even slightly friendly with any of the beasts was able to extract a lot of information about the planet. What Ragnar had learnt was that Nibiru hosted an extremely high number of extremely rare bloodlines and beasts. An excellent example was the Mercury Glubin performing on stage. This was one of the most deadly beasts in the entire known universe. It did not need to fight. It could simply use its liquid body to intrude into the body of cultivators with realms much higher than itself and poison them. A single drop of its body could eliminate an entire star-class civilization should it want to do so. Another example was the sentient tree, Igashima. It did not qualify as a beast, but that did not change the fact that a sentient spiritual plant was so rare that entire civilizations would go to war to obtain it. Such a tree could greatly aid in the cultivation of spiritual plants and was greatly coveted by the Galactic Pharmacology Society, also known more traditionally as the Pill Refining Society. The two beasts, Green's Haven and Bloodfang, were suspected to have rare and valuable bloodlines as well. This was not to mention, after Ragnar did a little research, he discovered that the three-toed Bradius clan, that the sloth Golden Hair, was actually a clan that ruled over an entire galaxy. Such a thing must not be underestimated, even by a force such as the Jotun Empire. Since they controlled many galaxies, they knew exactly how much strength it took to take control and maintain control of an entire galaxy. This was not to mention that some forces were strong enough to take control of multiple galaxies, but actually chose not to. This was because, even with control over an entire galaxy, actually harvesting and using the resources of that galaxy was not an easy task. Even the Jotun Empire did not fully utilize the resources of any one of the galaxies under their control. There were even more examples of rare beasts on Nibiru, and if Ragnar knew that the sovereign galactic turtle he'd seen in the inn also came from there, he would be even more sure that there was something unusual about this planet. All of that aside, what truly caught Ragnar's attention was a rumor. It was a simple rumor, with little evidence to support it, but still was not one he could ignore. It was a rumor that a mermaid existed in Nibiru. While Ragnar could ignore all other potential gains or dangers, a mermaid he could not ignore. Anthony, compile a report. Make a list of all known and suspected beasts found in Nibiru, and also add the suspected presence of a mermaid in the report. Send the report directly to the royal family. Let me know when it's done. Yes, sir, Anthony replied, and quickly got to work. Other than Ragnar's assistant, Anthony had another identity, which was actually the main reason he got assigned to Ragnar as an assistant. He was distantly related to the royal family of Jotun. His relation was not enough to be anyone important, but still he served as a means of communication with the royal family in case of an emergency. Such was a common practice, and each general level and above in the Jotun army had such an assistant. This was because if normally Ragnar wanted an audience with the royal family, he would need to go through proper procedure, which would take too long. This was a shortcut. A shortcut that Ragnar was using for the first time. Considering his mission, he could not divert his attention towards Nibiru. The royal family would decide how to deal with the situation. In a different room, Havel Elyun, the serpent king of the Jade Sea, stood before the sloth. The serpent had a serious and angry look in his eyes, but the sloth was enjoying Resin's performance. Green's Haven stood in the back with a somewhat defeated look on its face. This is a dereliction of duty. Havel roared at the sloth, barely containing itself. Your laziness has resulted in great losses. You did not even make your presence known when you arrived and slept through many millennia of destruction. Had I known a representative was on the planet, how could I have let the Kinari tribe fall? Only a single descendant lives. Life and death are a part of nature, child. As painful as it may be, as important as some may be to you, to the universe, all lives are equal. Do not, Havel began roaring, but despite his anger controlled himself. After suppressing his anger, he spoke again, in an aggressive but quieter tone, the child is in danger. The shark tribes have discovered the effects of their blood and have devoured almost the entire tribe. I was able to hide her, but the shark tribes have become too strong. They will challenge my reign, and I do not know the outcome. She must be taken off the planet, somewhere safe. The humans will no doubt hear of the tribe's existence. For the first time, the sloth frowned a little. After a moment, it seemed to make a decision. I will be taking some of the beasts to the mammoth soon. Have the girl ready, I will take her too. If you want to send someone else as well, for your service, I will allow it. But I will not interfere between your feud with the sharks. They are as much residents of Nibiru as you. I do not need your help in my fight, sloth. Were I not held down by duty and responsibility, the whole planet would be under my reign. I do not ask for your aid, just that you perform your own duty. With that Havel gave the sloth a derisive look and left. He had no interest in the games, nor did he care for Green's Haven, who was standing in the corner. He had to ready the mermaid and his daughter so that they could leave prepared. Once they were safely off the planet, Havel would have no more constraints. He would be able to finally begin his conquest. Though he had not earned the honor of being called a dragon yet, he would snatch the title with his own claws. And even that would be just the beginning of his journey. In the background, the last 3 performances took place: an artist who could make a painting and then enter it, changing it from within, a stand-up comedian who got an unusually large audience response, and finally an entire cast of actors and actresses that performed a play that resonated with almost all the humans as well as the beasts. After a short break, the finale would begin and the selected 2 performances would take place. Yet Lex was not paying attention to that. He was focused on the status for the comedian. He could not believe what he was seeing. If he did not know better, he would think the comedian had walked out of a harem anime. Chapter 137 Incubus. The comedian's status was quite interesting to Lex. Name, James Brent. Age, 21. Sex, male. Cultivation details, mortal. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Bloodline, incubus. Remarks, ensure that he does not elope with any in staff. It will be too embarrassing. Right off the bat, the first thing that stood out to Lex was that James' species was identified as only human, but he had the bloodline of an incubus. He did not know if actual incubi were different in any way from what he knew in stories from Earth, but they were definitely not supposed to be human. So either he had some way to hide details from his scan, or the reality of things were more complicated than they appeared. The second thing he noted was that, supposedly, incubi and succubi were supposed to hold untold charm towards the opposite sex, yet James' charisma was resonating not only with all the humans present, it was even affecting beasts. Yet despite influencing so many, Lex saw none of them having any sexual reaction to anything James said or did. Maybe that part of earthen lore was incorrect. The thing that surprised most, however, was that James was immortal, but his influence, though subtle, affected even those multiple cultivation realms above him. In his heart, Lex treated this as one of the most dangerous abilities he had come across yet. The reason he was sure this was an ability or effect that James was having instead of natural, normal charisma, was because he could feel himself being protected by the system from it. Yet for some reason, the system was not preventing the guests from the effect, the way it protected them from the natural aura of his bodyguard. Lex made a mental note to learn more about James. Though he was not sure how he felt about it yet, because according to earthen lore incubi were demons, he did keep in mind that such an influential person could make a good addition to the inn. Should things have been different, Ragnar and Golden Hair would have also picked up on James' anomaly, yet since they were busy, and the effect was not malicious, they did not pick up on it. Since the qualifying rounds had ended, there was a short lunch break. This was not specifically timed so that the guests would eat his spiritual food. Not at all. That was, to say the least, the farthest thing on Lex's mind. Absolutely. In his heart, Lex actually felt an itch to mingle a little with his guests. He wanted to ask them what they thought of the event so far, and what they would like to see in the combat portion of the games. But he had a feeling that they would be too formal in front of the innkeeper, so donning his Leo persona, he stepped out to the Colosseum. The first person he headed towards was Harry. He still needed to establish a relationship with his co-workers for this persona, and Harry seemed friendly enough. Hey, you're Harry, right? My name's Leo, owner of the Gamer's Den. We haven't had a chance to meet. Harry, who looked a little pale from overworking himself, looked at the jolly fellow in surprise. Indeed, although Harry had seen him around, they had never gotten a chance to get to know one another. Yeah, though I've had the opportunity to meet Z. You work the fellow too hard. Leo laughed, as if he had heard a hilarious joke and said, that kid needs to be a little more social. If no one came and talked to him, he would watch anime all day every day. But I try to show up and share some of his burden, but it's hard for me to disappear back on Earth. The folks would get suspicious if they don't know where I am or can't reach me. With this simple statement he created a strong alibi for why he couldn't stay much at the inn. Anyone who heard it would assume that he had many people around him who would notice if he were gone for long intervals. Lex planned on repeating versions of this statement while staying as vague as possible to let people fill in their own assumptions. It worked. Harry immediately realized how inconvenient it would be for him to come here if he weren't living alone. All he needed to do was keep track of his appointments back on Earth and he could spend the rest of his time at the inn. He hadn't done so yet, but he was planning on giving up his apartment on Earth as well. This way he wouldn't need to pay rent, and he could live in his room at the inn all the time. Yeah, it must be tough. It's easy for me since I live alone, but I can imagine the hassle of trying to dodge people so you can come to the inn. It's okay, I've gotten used to it. What do you think of the midnight games so far? Like that, the duo continued to chat and started getting comfortable with one another. It helped that Harry was enjoying the games and kept complimenting them, which directly fed Lex's ego. After a short break, the finalists were announced. To Lex's great surprise, the finalists were the YouTuber and the comedian. He truly was not expecting such an outcome. Since he had decided to watch the finale with Harry to give his Leo persona more presence, he had to be very discreet when checking how exactly those two had become the winners. As it turned out, despite their few numbers, the beasts became the deciding factors. Unlike the humans, who spent a lot of time thinking about things on a deeper level, and gauging how much or how little they liked things, the beasts were a lot more straightforward. They liked simplicity, and relied more on their instincts than humans. While the other performances had depth and complexity to them, these two performances resonated with them so much that their enjoyment was overwhelming. So while the humans enjoyed each performance, because they were more analytical and critical, their enjoyment was also measured. Long story short, those two were the winners. It seemed regardless of whichever one of them won, Earth already had the prize in the bag. The comedian went up on stage again, and gave his performance. It was unfortunate that he didn't have many more jokes, so much of his performance was a repeat. His effect on the crowd was tempered due to that, but it also allowed Lex to carefully understand how much of his influence was his own natural charisma and talent, and how much of it was the effect of the bloodline. "There's something a little strange about this comedian, don't you think?" Leo asked Harry. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he's repeating his jokes, but people are still finding him to be hilarious. I just think it's a little curious. It's not an easy thing to have so many people like you so quickly." Harry stopped to think about it, and wondered if he could notice something strange. Yet before he could think of anything, a voice came from behind them. "You are very sharp. It's the effect of a bloodline, and a very high-level one at that. All bloodlines naturally affect all living beings around them in a certain way." John stepped up beside them, revealing a smirk. He was not happy because he knew the answer, but because he had managed to save up enough MP to go to the mystery trial many more times. What his reaction would be when he discovered the long queue at the mystery trial was unknown. "Mary, why is the inn not stopping the effect of this bloodline?" Lex asked in his mind. "Because it's not detrimental in any way to any of the guests. Were it to harm the guests physically or spiritually, the way your bodyguard's aura from his bloodline would have, the system will intervene." "Do you know what his bloodline is?" Leo asked John. "No, it's not developed enough for me to identify, but I can tell it's powerful. If he were to cultivate his body, its effects would grow and eventually I'd be able to tell." "Do you know a lot about bloodlines? Can you tell me?" Leo asked again with excitement. John would be a good source of information. "Yeah, sure," John started, but then froze. An idea occurred to him, and after clearing his throat he said, "Since you are my colleague, I don't mind sharing some information with you. But I must charge you 1000 MP per topic." "Sure, I don't mind," Leo said quickly, before John had a chance to change his mind. He suddenly felt so much better knowing there was someone he could ask questions. Not that Mary didn't answer his questions, but every time he heard he didn't have enough authority he felt like choking the system. Chapter 138 Bloodlines. Soon after, the comedian went off stage, and the YouTuber went on. Similar to her last performance, she sat on stage alone on a stool. Her excitement was clearly visible on her face, though Lex did not think she cared for the award that would be granted to the entire planet. Clearly, whoever had brought her had promised her other prizes should she manage to get first place. After taking a few moments to calm herself, she began her performance. This time she sang the song, "A Thousand Years." Her voice was melodic and sweet and had great harmony. Still, it was surprising to Lex that this is what the beasts appreciated. He could have sworn that the two fighters smashing each other's guts out was more appealing to them. Guess he learned his lesson on stereotyping. For a few minutes, the inn went silent. The YouTuber's voice could be heard in every corner, and all the guests stopped whatever they were doing to enjoy the song. The birds and parrots native to the inn arrived at the Colosseum and started flying in circles around the stage. Even Little Blue, who had been throwing a tantrum, stopped to listen, much to the relief of the gardener as only he was watching the whale. The sovereign galactic turtle did not stop what he was doing, as he was busy using the devil/fertilizer to nurture the 3 rare seeds Lou had given it, yet gently bobbed its head along. For the first time, Lex noticed that cultivators and beasts alike were captivated by the young woman's voice, despite her being a complete mortal and having no bloodline to help her. Lex could not help but think of the ballerina at this moment. Had she not dropped out, would she have made it to the finals? The thought was fleeting, and Lex quickly forgot about it as he lost himself in the moment. Hers was the quickest performance, yet its impact was undeniable. Once the performance ended, it was officially the end of the first part of the show. Lex suddenly realized that at this moment he should have gone on stage to announce the winners, and share some details about the next portion of the games. But he was standing next to Harry and John, and it would be extremely suspicious if he suddenly disappeared, right before the innkeeper appeared. He could not tell if this was just a result of him being forgetful or his tumor was affecting his decision-making again. Either way, he needed to handle it. After considering what to do for a moment, he made his decision. An announcement was heard across the inn. The winner for the first portion will be declared at 6 p.m., along with the details for the combat portion of the games. With that, those who were waiting for the prize ceremony relaxed. It also gave them time to call everyone who was absent so that they could also attend the ceremony. Once again, it all seemed planned for the benefit of the guests, and not at all like a planning debacle, which it actually was. It seems like the ceremony is a few hours away, Leo said, turning to John. How about you tell me about bloodlines in the meantime? Oh, do you already have 1000 MP saved up? Your gamer's den must make more MP than I realized. Sure, follow me to my room. I would rather not have such conversations in public. Leo almost flinched as he realized another mistake. His income from the gamer's den wasn't that much considering the cost of renting a PC was only 1 MP, yet he dismissed the 1000 MP because he was considering his massive supply of MP as Lex. Leo should have tried to negotiate down the cost. This huge sum would also limit how many questions he could ask at a time. But what was done, there was no use in crying over spilt milk. Sure, let's go. Harry, do you want to join us? Can I? He asked hesitantly. Of course, since I'm paying anyway there's no reason you shouldn't take advantage. With that, the three of them retreated to battle axe. Even now, there were a few people waiting to avail John's services, but he was taking a break for the rest of the day and told them as much. Inside the trio made themselves comfortable as Leo sent John the 1000 MP. This was a hefty amount, no doubt, but the understanding was that any time Lex had questions about bloodlines John would answer them now. Bloodlines are a vague concept, John began, his voice deeper than normal. There is a general understanding of how they work based on many millennia of study, but there will occasionally be a new bloodline that contradicts previously understood convention, which is why they are not considered having strict rules. When talking of bloodlines, the first question that comes up is, what is the difference between a being with a bloodline and one without? This is because, even in the same species, there can be various bloodlines. The clearest example is the previous human who had a bloodline, but there are so many other humans present here who do not. The effect of bloodlines can be expressed in two main ways. The first is the effect on the person carrying the bloodline, and the second is the effect on those near the carrier. Usually, the effect on the person carrying the bloodline is some kind of enhancement to strength or ability, while to those near the carrier are some kind of suppression. I am being as general as possible, because bloodlines really are too varied and have too many effects. For example, the human performer. His bloodline did not seem to suppress those around him, but had some kind of charm effect. In beasts, the role of bloodlines is more common and apparent. A beast with a bloodline will have an easier time growing stronger, but its growth will be guided according to its bloodline. Here, they also suffer a drawback, which is that if they encounter another beast with the same bloodline, the one with a weaker or thinner bloodline will suffer an innate suppression. The second question that is asked often is, how is a bloodline formed? Even this has a few different answers. The purest bloodlines are formed as a result of cultivation. When a being reaches a very high level of cultivation, his or her bloodline naturally gains certain abilities or attributes according to how that being cultivated. For example, if a human cultivator who is focused on cultivating with a technique with an affinity for fire reaches a high enough level, his bloodline will gain attributes that support fire-based techniques. If that human has any children after that, a bloodline that aids in cultivating fire-based techniques will be formed and passed on to his descendants. The second, and the most common way, that bloodlines are formed is through the descendants of two different species. For example, if a human and a devil were to have a child, while the child will be born in the same species as the mother, the child will also inherit a bloodline that mixes the strengths of both races. The third way, and perhaps the most unstable way, that produces special bloodlines is to absorb the blood essence of any being with a much higher cultivation than oneself. To succeed in this there are many precautions one must take, and one has to be very careful when selecting the blood essence. Any mistake or complication can easily end up in death. For those that survive, the mistake may end up with a bloodline that is more detrimental than beneficial. This kind of bloodline also rarely passes down to descendants, and may pass many generations before showing up again. But this kind of bloodline is also the easiest to upgrade or grow, due to its unstable nature. All one has to do is continue to absorb the same or similar bloodlines at a higher realm or concentration. Usually, only those who are unable to continue cultivating choose such a path. John kept giving the two a lecture, and they both listened avidly. They were both newcomers to the world of cultivation and their knowledge and experience was extremely lacking. They asked him various questions, and as if he were a living library, John was able to give them all the answers they required. John's depth of knowledge was truly commendable, but then, considering his profession at the inn, such a fact should already have been obvious. John was incredibly patient in answering all their questions, as his actual profession, an assassin, also required an insurmountable level of patience. Just as the conversation was coming to a close, and Leo started thinking of excuses to leave, Harry asked, "Hey John, is it okay if I ask questions unrelated to this as well? I can also pay, I've saved up enough." "Sure, I see no harm," the man replied with a smile. It seemed poverty was no longer written in his destiny, as the MP came towards him without him even putting in any effort. I want to know how to raise the level of my soul. John raised an interested eyebrow, and Leo froze where he stood. Maybe he should stick around a little longer. Chapter 139 Simple Prizes. Chapter 139 Simple Prizes. Once the topic of the soul was touched upon, both Leo and John became interested. Leo because he himself was looking for ways to stabilize his soul, while John because it was such a rare topic for low-level cultivators. Even at higher realms, while it was more important to take note of, rarely would anyone specifically focus on it. Harry sent John the MP, which prompted him to wake from his stupor. If you're interested in the soul, you're very lucky to have met me. Few people are as knowledgeable about the soul as I. It's not a topic many focus on. Let's start with what the soul actually is. The soul is the very foundation for any living being. A being can live without a spirit, and it can live without a body, and occasionally even without both, but in order for a being to be alive it must have a soul. Souls are the only common feature shared by all living beings, yet at the same time, for something so common, it is the most elusive. As rare as they are, you will often come across natural treasures that aid in spirit or body cultivation, but hardly ever will you come across something that aids in the growth of the soul. In common cultivation convention, you only start actively strengthening the soul when you reach the nascent realm. Cultivation techniques that focus on using or strengthening the soul are so rare that even I have never actually seen them. John paused for a moment and eyed Harry. He already knew that Harry was practicing some strange technique that used his soul strength to affect his clients. It was something he had never come across before. Had the situation been different, maybe he would have been tempted to ask Harry the details about his cultivation. Now though, John was properly terrified of the innkeeper and was on his best behavior. There were some enemies even assassins would not dare cross. If you want me to make techniques that aid in strengthening your soul, I cannot help you. But I am familiar with some of the most common treasures that can aid in soul cultivation, so I can provide you with some guidance there. Much like spirit stones, which contain pure spirit energy, there are soul stones that can be used. But the thing about soul stones is that they can be used by anyone at all to strengthen their soul, which is why they are absolutely rare. Like spirit stones, they also come in different levels of strength and purity, but again, they are so rare that you are unlikely to encounter one easily. The next best thing for someone at your level to use is angel dust, fairy grass, or purified wraith's blood. Angel dust is incredibly powerful, yet at the same time very stable and nurturing, so it can be used even at your low level. But to get some, you would have to buy it from the angels. It's expensive and rare, but at least you know the source. The purified wraith's blood is a product sold by devils. If you have the guts, you can go buy it from them. The fairy grass is probably the best option for you, as it's a naturally occurring treasure. But it is extremely, extremely rare. The good news is that it only works for low-level cultivators, so the chances of you finding it are much higher than any of the others. The next best way, but an incredibly slow way, for you to increase your soul strength is to completely exhaust it and then let it recover naturally. The way your body builds muscle after great exertion, the soul also grows. It might be somewhat beneficial to you at your current level, but in the long run it's so slow that the natural growth experienced by your soul when you cultivate, though limited, outpaces it. John paused again, because he knew this was what Harry was most interested in and wanted to give him time to absorb the information. But since he had been paid to give information on the soul, he would do his job properly. His pride demanded it. While nurturing a soul is incredibly difficult, harming it on the other hand is very easy, which is why soul protection treasures are very valuable. One of the ways, though he tried to hide it, his excitement when talking about all the ways to kill a person by harming their soul came out just a little. The basic summary of everything he said that Leo took away was that if he found a way to hurt souls, under the nascent realm he'd become extremely dangerous. It also gave him a better idea of how incredible regal embrace was as it allowed his soul to heal naturally alongside his body, something that was otherwise unthinkable. No souls healed on their own and would always require external aid. Once John was done, Leo excused himself and teleported away. Shedding his persona, Lex donned his suit once more and readied himself for the award ceremony. He'd learned a lot of important things that would help him a lot in the cultivation of his soul, but those were things he would focus on after the midnight games. He spent the next few hours meditating. He'd noticed himself making more and more mistakes recently, something he could not allow himself to do as the innkeeper. He had to calm his mind and, preferably, get in the state of flow that he'd gotten in earlier somehow. Unfortunately, the state eluded him once again. As a backup, he explained his plan to Mary in great detail to vet for any obvious mistakes. Fortunately there were none. He repeated his plan to himself a couple of times to prepare. He didn't understand why he still felt nervous. He'd already addressed these people a few times, you'd think he'd be used to it by now. He put all such thoughts out of his mind, took a deep breath, and focused on the task at hand. He teleported out to the main stage wearing the warm, gentle smile that the innkeeper often wore. "How quickly the performances have already ended," he said, looking at the full Colosseum. Unlike during the performances when everyone was in their rooms, this time everyone sat out in the open. It was a sign of respect towards the innkeeper. The performances, in my humble opinion, were stellar. It was great to see so many similarities in culture, not only across various worlds, but across many species as well. It just shows, whether it's a display of strength, beauty, art or music, everyone can appreciate it. I hope this event serves as a foundation for a friendship that will last the ages. I could continue to stand here and compliment each performance endlessly, but I think it would be best if we just got on with the show. So, without any more delays, I would like to announce the winner of the first portion of the Midnight Games. Alyssa Harmony from Earth, congratulations on putting on a performance that moved the heart and soul of your audience. Please, stand so that you may be recognized. In the crowd, the young YouTuber stood up feeling a rush of exhilaration without comparison. She was dressed in a long red gown which complemented fair skin and blushing cheeks splendidly. Lex almost felt bad that the award was being shared by the whole planet without a special prize for her, but he also knew that as a mortal she would be in great danger if she received any prizes from him. No one would harm her at the inn, of course, but back on Earth someone may not be able to control their greed. Naturally, since there is a winner, there must be an award. But this time, the prize is not only for the winner, but the whole planet that they represent. The first prize is for all the performers of Earth. Whenever someone on your planet gives a performance that is able to resonate with enough people, they will automatically be invited to perform at the Midnight Inn. Of course, whether they accept or not is up to them, but should they accept they will be able to perform for audiences from across the universe. This was completely a prize for the performers and not a secret way for Lex to get free and frequent entertaining events at the inn. No sir, it only benefited the performers. The second and final award, though simple, can be shared by the entire planet. After 1 month, a new hidden realm will be opened on Earth containing the heritage of an ancient cultivator, and will remain open for 1 entire year. What kind of treasures you can reap will be completely up to you, but whatever they may be, this will be a great opportunity. The innkeeper spoke in his usual casual tone, but whether it was the humans, the devils or the beasts, they all had a change in expression. This was no simple prize. Chapter 140. Gather your armies. Whether they be called minor realms, hidden realms, secret realms, pocket dimensions or anything else, the concept was the same. It was basically a separate pocket of space, disconnected from the main universe. Sometimes they formed naturally, and in some cases, a very high-leveled cultivator could open them up on their own. These separate dimensions had their own ecosystem and existed in their own sustained balance. Sometimes, this ecosystem was extremely hazardous and could not support life. But in cases like this, such realms often give birth to extremely precious and rare treasures, whether they be in the form of precious ores, liquids, gases or anything else. Most of the time, however, these realms had a very stable environment, rich in spiritual energy. If these realms were left untouched by outside interference, they often gave birth to extremely powerful beasts or other species with incredibly high talents. Most such realms found on Earth were extremely small and were full of opportunities for anyone to take. They opened at fixed or random intervals, and so could only be treated as places for small, quick incursions. That was also why, after so many years, these realms still had not been stripped of all their treasures, they just didn't have the time to do so. Having a realm remain open for 1 year continuously was unheard of on Earth, which is why they could not believe it. This was too good to be true. This was not mentioning that the realm the innkeeper was talking about was most likely a new realm to the Earthlings, so far unexplored. The reason why Sloth of the Beasts and the remaining devils were surprised was completely different. Space was complex beyond what most people could normally comprehend. Most people saw it as a linear existence. Some incredibly intelligent scientists on Earth theorized the nature of space to be curved. Yet high-leveled cultivators who could directly feel the complexity of space knew just how much more complicated than that it was. Based on the assumption that the realm the innkeeper opened for Earth was one that was already anchored to Earth, his achievement was already amazing. Finding and artificially opening hidden realms without causing them to collapse and retain their stable ecosystem required a deep understanding of space beyond what was normally seen. This was completely ignoring the level of cultivation required. But there was another possibility, one that was truly mind-blowing. Hidden realms that were anchored to a planet moved in space alongside the planet as it not only orbited its sun, but as its solar system moved in the universe. This is why they could be opened repeatedly in the same place on the planet multiple times. But some hidden realms had no anchors and moved through space like a leaf flying through the wind. These hidden realms were much more difficult to find, to the point where one might not be discovered in 100,000 years. Once they were found, they needed to be artificially anchored to a point before they could be opened, yet doing so would tamper with the internal ecosystem of the hidden realm. Being able to anchor it without tampering with the ecosystem was even rarer than finding such a realm, and then maintaining the opening for a long time was even harder. Whether the Innkeeper had achieved the former or the latter, both were extremely impressive and daunting. It also led to the possibility that the Inn existed in a hidden realm that the Innkeeper either discovered or created. Whichever the case, the result was very telling about the Innkeeper's capabilities. Lex, of course, had no idea about the various complexities involving him opening such a realm. All he knew was that he selected one of the cheapest prizes the system offered. The prize would be different depending on which planet won, as the same realm could not be accessed by all 3 planets. Whatever the truth of the matter was, Lex was pleased to see that his prize had thoroughly impressed the crowd. If only he knew the true ramifications of what he had done. In one of the rooms in the Colosseum sat 2 beings that appeared to be human. They appeared to be human, because one of them was Loretta in a completely different disguise. This time when she came to the inn she avoided all the devils. In fact, she avoided meeting anyone. She appeared, rented the room, and hadn't left since. The man who was sitting beside her had only appeared yesterday. He watched the Innkeeper with great interest and observed each and every action of his. He analyzed every word and focused on every expression he made. "He is somewhat interesting," the man said softly to Loretta. He was not worried about being overheard because they had, naturally, set up their own isolation formation in the room. "I cannot get a read on his cultivation, but the celestial I've basically seen through. When the Innkeeper is not around, he monitors the whole inn. But as soon as the Innkeeper appears, he follows the Innkeeper closely. If I didn't know better, I would say the celestial is acting like a bodyguard." The man had managed to get all this information without using his spiritual sense, which may have alerted the Innkeeper. How exactly he obtained this information, though, was a mystery. "If the Innkeeper needs a bodyguard, maybe he's not that strong," Loretta said. They themselves had not seen the Innkeeper make a move personally, so there was still some room for speculation. But realistically speaking, no one believed the Innkeeper was weak. "It's unlikely. He is most probably just using the celestial as a deterrent, and so that he himself does not need to make a move. This way, he can keep his spiritual signature hidden. This Innkeeper may be some old acquaintance we previously thought dead, and by not making a move personally, he can continue to hide his identity." The man thought for a moment before he continued. "There is also the possibility he is from the unknown regions of space. That would make things more tricky. So, what do you think we should do? For now, wait. I want to see exactly how he will conduct his games. According to what you told me, the contestants are limited to Foundation and Golden Core realms, but I've had a few secret guards assigned to each node. How will he avoid them, I wonder?" Loretta nodded, silently accepting what the man said. All they had to do now was wait. In a different room, a lone human sat as he watched the Innkeeper. He had a mischievous grin on his face, and under his breath he also kept muttering "interesting." In front of him lay a report personally written by Ragnar. Back on stage, Lex only waited for a couple of moments for his audience to absorb the details of his reward before he continued his speech. With that concluded, let's now turn our attention to the combat portion of the Midnight Games. There are 10 nodes that need to be destroyed, and so there will be 10 games. The first 5 of those games will be played by the Foundation Realm contestants, and the latter 5 by the Golden Core contestants. Going along with the theme of 5, each planet may bring 5,000 contestants for the Foundation and Golden Core stages each. But I advise you to take this matter very seriously, as even though they are titled games, each round will be fraught with real danger. Once you enter the round, until victory or defeat is determined, your life is very much in real danger. The games will take place one by one, and only the survivors of the first game can enter the second. The teams for each world will enter the round at the same time, and it's entirely up to you if you want to work together, work independently, or even sabotage one another. At the end of each round, all 3 worlds will gain points based on 3 things: total number of zombie kills by contestants of that world, total contribution to the destruction of the node, and total number of survivors. The rounds will be played in a siege format, with the zombies defending and the 3 worlds attacking. However, during each round unexpected events may occur that make each round more interesting. The combat portion of the Midnight Games will begin in exactly 24 hours, and all contestants for the first 5 games must be registered and present in the inn at that time or they won't get an opportunity to participate. The Innkeeper paused for a moment, and looked at the serious faces of his various guests. We've already seen how the 3 worlds live when they have harmony. Now it's time to see how they perform during times of war. I encourage you all to do your best, as the prizes for this portion of the games will only be better than the previous ones, not worse. Not giving them any time for questions, Lex disappeared from the stage. They had much to prepare and it was best if they utilized their time properly. Even the sloth, who was so far uninterested in competing, turned to look at Green's Haven and said, "Gather your armies. We must win this award."